When it comes to action horror, there's a pretty sizable list of titles that I have a strong fondness for, all of which find themselves regularly reinstalled on my computer right around the spooky season. The older I get, however, the more one title seems to stick out, if for just how interesting it is as far as horror franchises go. A title made by a developer who walked through hell to deliver a trilogy of games that, despite their jank, remain beloved by gamers and horror fans alike. I'm of course talking about the Metro series. The games developed by 4A Games, based on the books written by Dmytro Zenin, a post-apocalyptic action-adventure set in a fascinating and terrifying world, taking elements from classic Eastern European science fiction while also adding in bizarre, supernatural elements to create an atmosphere like none other. What started out as a little experiment blossomed on the PC and Xbox into a AAA brand, breaking out of being a cult classic, and now it's just openly regarded as a classic. This year, I wanted to go back and revisit the game that started it all. The game whose popularity put 4A and Glukhovsky on the map for Western audiences. The original, Metro 2033. Metro 2033 turned 16 this year. And hilariously, the time between when this game came out and now is nearly twice the amount of time between now and the future sci-fi year that the story is set in. In fact, a part of me was tempted to pull an annoying hipster move and put off making this review until the year 2033, but no, I'm not waiting 8 years. We're doing it now. I find this series to be deeply fascinating because it often feels like a smaller studio punching high above their weight into the big leagues, rubbing shoulders with massive AAA juggernauts, all from a humble little studio with rough beginnings who are just trying their best. Even after all these years, they still remain a shockingly tight-knit studio, whose size even now might surprise some people, especially in comparison to other game studios. People approach Metro completely unaware that what they're playing isn't a generic by-the-numbers action game, nor is it a tropey, headache-inducing quick-time event movie game. Instead, what you get is a strange yet alluring window into a fascinating world, the brainchild of a single author with equally humble origins. That's why I find Metro to be so unique and interesting. Where most people see a fun yet somewhat flawed trilogy of action horror games, I see the evolution of a game studio and an author growing and evolving, honing their craft, and ultimately creating a single-player journey. A journey full of action, scares, and uniquely Eastern European culture surrounding all of it. I can hear the rocket trails breaking through the stratosphere. We don't have much time, so let's grab our gas masks, charge up our flashlights, and lock those pressure doors. Tonight, this bunker dweller is going to show you the very piece of art that got him into the genre. We're climbing down into the Metro. The Moscow Metro can trace its earliest roots as far back as the days of the Russian Empire. The idea of building a metro line in Moscow had been steadily gaining traction. It was an ever-growing city, one that laid at the heart of the empire for centuries, and modernizing its capital for a fastly growing form of public transit was an appealing idea, if daunting. Of course, the Russian Empire would never properly see this plan through. Before any track could be laid, the empire was pulled into the Great War. A war which its leadership was woefully unprepared for, falling victim to a violent, bloody revolution. Moscow would remain the seat of power even for this newly formed government, and as such, it would become the political heart of the Soviet Union, and by extension, much of the communist world itself. As the city was forcefully dragged down the path of modernization, the prospect of revisiting this proposal for a modern metro transit system became more than just a potential logistical boon, but a cultural one. Stalin in particular held the idea in high regard, seeing it as a way for the Soviets to demonstrate their talent in construction, architecture, and city planning, a way to show the rest of the world just how modern the Soviets were. Using it not just as a way to help transport people efficiently, but as a permanent propaganda piece. Despite the fact that the tunnel was meant to be a celebration of communism, the Moscow-based construction company that was tasked with designing it had to quietly ask for help from British architects, specifically the ones responsible for the London Underground. They would help design the very first metro lines, helping plan out the routes, doing general construction overviews of how to go about making the tunnels, as well as many other design decisions needed for building a modern metro system, including the use of escalators, as well as the use of beautiful classical architecture throughout the stations. Indeed, it was British engineers who helped design the early lines and stations of the Moscow metro system, a fact that the Russians were very quick to hide. Throughout the 1930s, the earliest lines began to take shape along the Moscow underground. The first line to open, the Red Line, would sport extravagant classical design, huge chandeliers, beautifully carved marble. This would become a recurring thing, with stations built in the late 30s and even up until the 50s, all sporting this architecture style. Of these early stations, one particular hub became the station right beneath the Moscow State Library. This will be relevant to us much later. There were multiple phases of construction, stretching from the 30s through the 40s and into the 50s. Construction would be interrupted briefly during the Second World War, delaying but not stopping the ever-growing tunnels beneath the city. Those tunnels would serve as temporary shelters during air raids, and as front lines were pushed out of Russia, construction could resume at an even faster pace. At the end of the Second World War, Soviet leadership would be faced with a new technological reality, the atom bomb. As radioactive fallout settled over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Soviet leaders in Moscow became acutely aware of the new world that they had just entered. No longer was this a war of marching armies and front lines, but now this would be a standoff between the East and the West, a battle to harness the power of the atom. The Cold War would affect how the metro would grow soon after, with stations and lines going much deeper, and a handful of stations in the 50s being built with the express purpose of surviving a nuclear detonation. After Stalin died in his own puddle of piss, Khrushchev took leadership, and he had a different plan for the underground. He would change the focus of the metro system, moving away from expensive classical designs, ordering cheaper utilitarian and minimalist designs. Cheap, easily mass-produced stations. This includes the station Videnha, known in-game as Exhibition Station. This also applies to a few other stations seen in the game, including Riga and the Market. Throughout the decades, construction would never really stop. After the reign of Khrushchev and deep into the 60s, 70s, and 80s, all up to the dissolution of the Soviet Union, more and more lines would be built around Moscow. Existing lines would expand, new stations would crop up, and soon a variety of architecture styles would be played around with. Stations would sometimes have their own unique theme and style, all varying wildly. You had gray brutalist stations, colorful extravagant stations, stations with colored murals, some stations with sleek modern curves, and some stations with Spartan designs, only having blocky tiled walls and thin pillars. Slowly but surely, the largest metro system in Europe continued to grow, and by the late 70s, it was already the busiest in the world. Millions of Moscow citizens moved through its concrete veins every day. It became just a regular part of daily life for the city's inhabitants. Given its immense size and the sheer number of people who either rode on it or worked on it, it was no surprise that rumors and leaks about the tunnels would slowly trickle out, that being a secret second hidden metro line, Metro 2. Rumors would circulate about a secret tunnel system built alongside the public metro system, much smaller but much deeper. A hidden second metro line exclusive for the top brass of Soviet leadership. There were always whispers among Moscow residents, urban explorers, and even Western intelligence that there was a government-exclusive metro line whose knowledge was only kept by the highest-ranking officials in the Soviet Union. Even in the years after the dissolution of the Soviet government, more and more information has only really trickled out about this so-called Metro 2. Alleged photographs have been taken, notable buildings on the surface are rumored to be secret air vents for its deep tunnels. Many ex-officials have even been interviewed and have either hinted at or outright confirmed the existence of the second metro system. Urban explorers have even identified potential doorways into Metro 2, with the unofficial name D6 being attributed to the hidden underground tunnels. This is probably a misnomer and was very likely a tunnel designation that was misread. Either way, it's fully believed, even in our own intelligence community, that the Metro 2 does exist, and it's likely multi-purpose. It's commonly accepted that this was likely initially built as a secure transportation line just for Soviet officials, probably Stalin himself, as a way to quick move them through the city, either to prevent assassination attempts or to securely move leadership if no other means of transport were viable. But it's also serviceable as a nuclear shelter, being nearly twice as deep as the deepest other station in the public Moscow tunnel. It would guarantee that Russian command and leadership could remain alive in the event of a nuclear strike, and so this hidden line likely contains all that is needed to command the country: storage, armories, barracks, and command facilities. If all of Moscow was turned into radioactive rubble, the deep tunnels of Metro 2 and D6 would probably remain untouched and could house any Russian leadership who might not have been able to escape the city in time. Either way, I hope this does a strong enough job painting the picture of how significant the Moscow Metro is to its denizens. This is the context we need to truly understand why the Moscow Underground holds such relevance, especially in culture. The Soviet Union was not the economy that the West had. It's estimated that only 4 to 5% of the population owned a vehicle. So those metro tunnels, those were the main streets of Moscow. This is the environment that a young, aspiring author, Dmitry Glukovsky, would grow up in. As a kid in the 1980s, it's likely these glimpses of the gaudy, classical architecture from the old Stalin era, mixed with those blocky, brutalist stations under Khrushchev, as well as the slick, abstract minimalism of stations built in the 70s and early 80s, where he would find inspiration for his world. So as he turned 18, the foundation to his world would be drafted, not to pen and paper, but to the digital new world that was the internet. When you hear that a European studio made a game based off a European science fiction novel, the first thought that might come to mind is that this will be some sort of weird, niche, avant-garde RPG, or maybe a point-and-click adventure game. Action horror FPS isn't what usually comes to mind. In 2002, the young Russian writer, Dmitry Glukovsky, after years writing and drafting his story, would self-publish the very first iteration of his book, called Underground. It wasn't actually a book by this point, and it was an online novel that was published to his website for free. It took heavy inspiration from the art and media that Glukovsky had grown up with. Esteemed science fiction literature from the Strugatsky brothers, mainly being Roadside Picnic, as well as another story of theirs, The Doomed City. These stories, mostly Roadside Picnic, as well as the movie that was adapted from it, Andrei Tarkovsky's 1979 film Stalker, gave inspiration to many of the otherworldly phenomena, down to even using shared terminology, reality-bending entities called anomalies, as well as explorers that would venture out into the toxic surface to scavenge for artifacts, known as stalkers. The book was a cornerstone in Soviet science fiction in the late 20th century, so its influence here really is no surprise.
Roadside Picnic. Huh, something familiar.
Their other story, The Doomed City, inspired the urban exploration theme of the story. The idea of setting an adventure not through a fantastical wilderness, but of concrete ruins of a civilization long since ended. Another overlooked piece of fiction that also served as heavy inspiration was the 1986 Lopushinsky-directed film Dead Man's Letters. This lesser-known but groundbreaking piece of Soviet filmmaking depicted a post-apocalyptic future in which humanity is forced to live in underground bunkers, scavenging for food and medicine just to survive. Its beautiful visuals and bleak portrayal of the future still leave a lasting impact, and it's easy to see why this served as a big influence in Glukovsky's world, down to human infighting, desperate scavenging on the surface wearing gas masks, and a recurring theme about the next generation of children born in the wasteland who don't know any other world. It's a haunting piece of late Soviet art, and one that no doubt heavily influenced Metro 2033 in terms of storytelling and also aesthetics. In some ways, it seems like more of a precursor to Metro than any of the other books or movies mentioned prior. Aside from old Soviet-era science fiction, Dmitry found inspiration elsewhere. Being a younger man in the 80s and a teenager in the 90s, Glukovsky was part of a new, younger generation of Russians, unofficially dubbed as the children of perestroika, the children growing up under Gorbachev. Kids who came of age as the Soviet Union collapsed, and who grew into adolescence into the digital age. This new generation would not be content with the censorship-heavy, state-approved art as their parents were used to under the Iron Curtain. Out was the Soviet propaganda, and in came the rock and roll, the brash and the offensive, and more importantly, video games. This was the first generation that had access to an unfiltered world of video games and video game hardware. Western video games quickly found their way into Russia, usually through bootleg pirated cartridges and clone consoles. PC hardware was rapidly growing in popularity, and PC gaming itself took hold of many former Soviet states, Russia included. In Glukhovsky's own words, Fallout 1 and 2 were his obsession as a teenager, and it's clear to see how their environments and aesthetics would go on to inspire the Metro series. Things like mutant enemies, multiple factions vying for power in the wasteland, and the idea of secret underground vaults full of hidden technology. In this regard, the book is a very interesting piece of art. It was a celebration of the science fiction that Dmytro had grown up with, across all mediums and eras. It incorporated his experiences in the world of the Moscow underground, which itself encompasses multiple decades of different architectural styles, all across the history of the Soviet Union. It incorporates long-standing rumors and urban legends, mainly about the fabled Metro 2. This setting was wrapped up in a story that incorporated science fiction elements from the Soviet-era books and movies that he had grown up with, ultimately stepping beyond these boundaries and embracing the new digital age of computers, video games, and the internet. What was originally a love letter to the science fiction he had grown up with became a new defining story in the very medium he was paying homage to, and it would pave the way for the future of authorship in the 21st century. An adventure through horrifying situations and ethical dilemmas, all in the backdrop of his world. It's a hero's journey, following the young protagonist Artyom as he embarks on his own odyssey. Of course, this is not a journey through an ocean of gods and monsters, but rather it's the ruins of a world which we recognize. The darkness of a metro tunnel, a mundane part of our world which has been twisted beyond recognition and now houses horrors beyond the reader's comprehension. In a way, I think that this is what makes the book so especially compelling to read. When we learn about the characters and their view of the world, it's quaint to see how little they know outside of the tunnel. To them, the world is incomprehensible. They aren't able to conceive of the fact that the entire metro tunnel was, at one point, just transit for the people who once lived above. Children wonder if the sky is even real. Religious cults are starting to think the tunnels were carved out by divine worms, as they can't even wrap their minds around the fact that these were built by man to service a whole world above them. The idea of trains being used to transport people is considered a lost technology. They can't comprehend life in a world that is very real and mundane to us. But on the flip side, the things that are mundane to them are completely inconceivable to us. Dark, twisted, supernatural anomalies. Tunnels whose layout defies logic and whose travelers will become lost and will never find their way out. Shadows of dead spirits aimlessly wandering through abandoned stations. Whispers and screams of tortured souls ringing through the pipes. Creatures and beings whose appearance and abilities can't be explained through science. To the denizens of the metro, this is the only life they've ever known, and it's something they just accept. Traveling between stations doesn't always guarantee that you'll make it back. Sometimes those who wander into the dark never find their way out. It's an accepted risk, and what's just a regular part of life to them is ironically what's terrifying to the reader. The book also follows a bleak ending, similar to the art that inspired it. It's clear that Glukhovsky wanted to leave the reader on a somber, introspective moment. Likely inspired by the films he grew up with, the original online version of the story concludes abruptly. Artyom dies in the online story. He gets killed from a random gunfight, his goal unachieved and his mission forgotten. You can see that Dmytro wanted to make the reader question the entire journey up to this point, to just wonder how futile everything was. Of course, readers took issue with this. It's an unresolved end to their journey. People wanted closure. And, admittedly, ending the story by killing your main protagonist before a satisfying third act, it is bold. It's also very unsatisfying. Glukhovsky seemed to agree. So he revised it. New chapters were added, and the story was rounded out to a poignant, yet far more satisfying final act. Artyom makes it to the end of his adventure, with an even further twist. The purpose of that mission is spun on its head, shifting the entire premise of the story. While the ending is a little more satisfying, it's still not a happy one. There is no chance of redemption, either for Artyom or for the mysterious race of surface dwellers, the Dark Ones. This is the ending that readers are given, and they're left to only stew and dwell on it. The story became a viral sensation in Russia, and people loved it. And despite the complaints about his original ending, it spread across the Russian internet like wildfire. The revised version of the story with the new ending would end up finding a physical publisher, and Dmytro's digital novel, under a new name, would finally make it to print. Metro 2033. Thanks to its prior online popularity, Metro 2033 managed to be a pretty big hit in the sci-fi scene of Eastern Europe. It was quickly translated into many other languages and found itself slowly spreading globally. There hadn't been anything quite like this before, an author getting his start completely outside the normal chain of publishing deals, using the internet as a springboard. The story left an impact on readers, treating them to this horrifying yet captivating world, while also providing readers with an excellent, approachable story about a character's journey. And outside the Russian web, millions more would come to sing its praises, both its readers, as well as those seeking to get in on the action. The idea of adapting the book into something audiences could visualize became appealing to many studios, and one little Ukrainian-based game studio was looking to get started on their first video game project. And the book, Metro 2033, seemed like just the perfect opportunity to stretch their legs. And so, one day, Dmytro got to meet with the studio that he would eventually entrust with his work, 4A Games. Of course, if we're talking about 4A Games, then we need to acknowledge the elephant's foot in the room. To discuss 4A Games, we must go further back in time, to the late 90s and the early 2000s. We must look back at GSC. In the late 90s, there was a fledgling game development studio that had formed in Kiev. It was the Ukrainian developer GSC Game World. The early studio was made up of around 15 people in a 2-bedroom apartment. Amongst the small team was the company's founder, Sergei Grigorovich, which is actually where the studio is named after. It's his initials. Alongside Sergei was a young game developer, Andrew Prokhorov. He'll become important in just a sec. The company initially started out translating PC games into Russian, but GSC weren't content in just porting other people's games. They wanted to work on their own games instead, and so they first started working on niche PC strategy games. Their debut product would be a fan game of the then popular Warcraft 1 and 2, Warcraft 2000: Nuclear Epidemic. To call it a fan project is quite generous, as if I were a lawyer, I might more accurately describe it as an unlicensed, unsanctioned spin-off, treading dangerously through international copyright law. After this, GSC would begin focusing on their own projects, mainly being the Cossack series. They would also start branching off into first-person shooters, with the sci-fi tactical FPS codename Venom, and the arena shooter Firestarter. Both of these titles showcase their desire to develop 3D first-person shooters in a science fiction setting. Codename Venom was particularly notable for having elements reminiscent of the book Roadside Picnic. After this, GSC began to work on what would become their magnum opus, Stalker, then called Stalker Oblivion Lost. Stalker had gone through countless revisions, starting off as an outright Stargate-inspired sci-fi romp through space, only till after many revisions later, it became more of a post-apocalyptic RPG, set in the exclusion zone of Chernobyl, influenced heavily by the film Stalker and the book Roadside Picnic, but also adding its own Ukraine flair. GSC had also managed to find a publisher, THQ, who were interested in publishing the project in the West. So the company got to work, planning for a 2003 release date. And its release window got pushed back another year, then another year, then another year, before finally it was pushed back after constant delay to 2007. This period of time was pretty bad for the company. Staff weren't getting properly paid. Sergei, the founder, the company's namesake, allegedly was treating his employees like shit. All the while, he had bought himself a Ferrari with the license plate reading Stalker on it. He was using money that he was somehow getting through a company that couldn't even properly pay its own employees, celebrating a game that hadn't even come out yet. Bear with me. Just imagine the visual. You're coming into work every day, early in the morning. You can't even afford your own car. You either have to walk to work or take public transit. You enter your company's parking lot, which is barren. No one else can afford a car. However, there are 2 expensive cars in the parking lot, one of which was a Ferrari with the license plate reading Stalker on it, and both of those belong to the guy who's treating you like shit, forcing you to slave over a game stuck in limbo, with you and the rest of your team getting paid low wages that sometimes weren't getting paid at all, with you all forced to work long hours and late nights. Andrew Prokhorov had enough. Andrew left GSC, and with them he brought along 2 lead programmers, Oles Shishkovstov and Alexander Maximchuk. Together they formed 4A. They did so under a mission statement completely opposite of what Sergey was doing over at GSC. They wanted a studio that respected its programmers and artists above all else, where money was to keep the studio alive and to keep its employees well paid, not on buying Ferraris. Fun fact, Oles and Alexander were the two leads who created the X-Ray engine, the same engine that GSC would be stuck with using for Stalker and its later expansions. An engine that when it had finally shipped, its two creators had already left. This may become relevant in a few years. After Stalker, GSC would lay off its entire art team, who 4A would gladly scoop up for their own better paying positions. Suffice to say, as people dropped from GSC like flies, 4A games grew rapidly, and they were looking for a project to sink their teeth into. As luck would have it, right when 4A was forming, there was a certain post-apocalyptic novel that had been picking up traction at this time. Our old pal Glukhovsky had been keenly aware of the intentions of other studios in adapting his novel, especially game studios. Yeah, believe it or not, 4A was not the first company who had approached Glukhovsky. Allegedly, he had already turned down a few pitches by the time this fledgling Kiev-based developer approached him. 4A gave their pitch. They showed him their idea for what a Metro game could look like. Glukhovsky saw their proposal, and he loved it. One of the simplest reasons he's given in interviews is that he thought they were a good developer, because he wanted an Eastern European developer who understood the culture. With the approval to use his IP, 4A went to work, using their growing pool of talent, most of which were coming in, fleeing from the hell that was GSC. In 2006, they had whipped up a pre-alpha, mostly to give a vertical slice of 4A scripting, visuals, and combat. It's pretty remarkable how this early on, 4A had already nailed their design concept. Notably, the pre-alpha contains level environments that seem strikingly similar to levels that would end up in the final release of the game, specifically the level's defense and outpost. In designing their game, 4A has cited multiple inspirations, some to be expected, like Half-Life 2 and Doom 3. There were some surprising ones though, like Splinter Cell and Metal Gear Solid. At the same time, 4A needed a publisher, and as luck would have it, they were about to bump into their old friends at GSC. GSC at the time was in hot water. They had a game that seemed like it was doomed for failure, with a team that was failing to meet milestones. Remember, this was a game that was delayed from 2003 to 2007. THQ was still looking for their Eastern European hit, and this is where a man by the name of Dean Sharpe comes into the picture. Dean Sharpe was an American producer working with THQ who had been sent, a little bit against his will, to Ukraine, entirely to help GSC in their development of Stalker. THQ was getting very nervous with how problematic things had been regarding the development of the first Stalker game. GSC was a completely dysfunctional company. Dean was basically sent as a way to keep the team on track and to get them to finish some sort of playable product that they could sell. And boy, was Sharpe in hell. The GSC staff hated him. He had to fight tooth and nail to keep them hitting deadlines. The game was constantly broken and buggy. Dean found himself flying back and forth from California to Kiev over and over as Stalker continued to not hit milestones. It was a complete shit show. The team hated him. He hated the job. I do recommend reading his Eurogamer interview. I do not do justice to how hilarious Sharpe is in telling the story. Notably, there was a moment where he made a spectacle of himself, loudly cursing out Sergey and his broken game. Sergey had that effect on people. As the tale goes, Sharpe found himself at a trade show helping promote Stalker. This was the last stop on his tour through hell before he was due back in sunny, warm California. He had finally gotten Stalker to a playable state and his job in Ukraine was done. But, by pure happenstance, he caught a glimpse of the 4A booth and saw a working prototype for Metro, and it blew him away. Likely seeing the big potential cross-cultural hit in Metro that THQ had thought might be the case for Stalker, he scrambled to tell THQ higher-ups about this new studio. And soon, 4A Games found themselves with THQ as a publisher. The very man who was ready to put Ukraine behind him, thanks to the nightmare of working on Stalker, would find himself helping 4A in the development of Metro. And years later, he would eventually find himself in the position of 4A's CEO, a position which he still holds. The original pitch for Metro was much grander in scope, as it was called Metro Nightmare's World. It was a lot. A non-linear story with NPC behavior that behaves independently from player interaction. A pseudo-open world with RPG levels of exploration similar to Stalker. A full day-night cycle that apparently would dynamically affect how stations behave and act. tons of optional side objectives, drivable vehicles, character customization through armor and outfits, a ton of unused mutants whose designs are so weird and bizarre, they almost look like Half-Life aliens, and an extensive multiplayer suite with PvP, minigames, and a game mode where players race as rats, alluding to a potential future online MMO. Yup. There are entire videos breaking down the original pitch, so I won't go too much into detail. My own opinion is that, in retrospect, it was definitely a lot, but that's also kind of what pitches are for. The process of developing a game is basically taking all of your wild, weird ideas and smoothing them out until you have a streamlined, coherent product. Feature creep is a famous problem in the games industry, which is why it helps when you can get that out of the way in one large design document, so that once you're actually in production, you can hack off these extra unneeded features before you waste any time on them. The last thing a developer needs is to waste time working on features that will never make it into the final game because they couldn't say no to an unnecessary mechanic. With Metro Nightmare's World, it's clear that a lot of this is just spitballing. At its core, 4A wanted a cinematic, story-driven action horror shooter with elements of stealth, world building, interaction, and exploration. A linear plot, plenty of scripting and cutscenes. I feel like some of these other inclusions were just extras they thought they might need given the climate of the industry at the time. The mid to late 2000s was really the era of online console shooters, open worlds, and cinematic scripting. To me, I just see 4A trying to figure out where Metro might fit within these trends. So, no, I don't think a multiplayer was ever seriously considered for Metro, nor do I think non-linear RPG mechanics were ever that big of a priority. From the earliest pre-alpha demos, Metro kind of already knew what it was. Linear, corridor shooting with horror, stealth, and action, all set in a detailed world with a scripted cinematic story. But if a publisher ever came along and wanted something a bit bigger, well, 4A had some potential ideas. That's what the document always felt like to me. More of a series of possible extras in case 4A needed to deliver something bigger. My favorite extra detail that they included was the possibility of making expansion packs, all set on their own respective metro lines in other cities across the world. What a fun novel idea. Ultimately, under THQ, 4A did not have to worry about any of these extra features. That core gameplay demo, the one that Dean Sharpe had been wowed by, was exactly what the publisher was looking for. Metro took shape. Things like non-linear gameplay elements were mostly removed, save for small little side objectives and moral points. The story was ironed out. No vehicles, sadly. We'll have to wait for the sequels for that. And there was no multiplayer deathmatch mode. A linear romp through the ruins of Moscow, in and out of tunnels, brief stops on the surface, and a captivating story doing its best to adapt the novel into a cinematic first-person shooter. Early on, a decision was made to make Artyom a silent protagonist, similar to characters in Half-Life and Doom. It's a mechanic that does help the player immerse themselves as Artyom. I know some newer fans take issue with Artyom's silence outside of loading screens, but I feel, for the first in the trilogy, it helps keep the player from getting lost or confused. Artyom becomes a self-insert character for all players. I always found this complaint to be a non-issue. Metro 2033, named directly after the novel, it had spent years in development streamlining itself into a competent, high-budget cinematic shooter, and 4A grew along with it. The original team of 20, mostly former GSC devs, were now a bustling studio of 80. Although, they wouldn't be free from GSC quite yet. As the game approached its release window of 2010, our good old friend Sergey comes back into the picture, because he was talking to Russian press, levying complaints against his self-made rivals. After gameplay had been shown off through various gameplay trailers and demos, Sergey levied an accusation that 4A's own proprietary 4A engine was built off of stolen assets from the X-Ray engine for Stalker. It's important to note, he waited to levy these complaints just a month before Metro's release, which surely wasn't an attempt by him to sabotage the game's launch with controversy. The complaint is multi-layered, but I also find it to be kind of funny. The original Metro pre-alpha, from back in 2006, right when the studio had begun to develop Metro, was running off a very primitive engine that bears striking similarities to Stalker's X-Ray engine, down to it even sharing some assets. This pre-alpha also contains chunks of the levels, which remain in the game up until its release, implying that if the X-Ray engine was used for this prototype, then in some form it still remains within the game's code after launch. As the only other explanation would be 4A completely disassembling and rebuilding this new engine from scratch. So it's likely that some of X-Ray's code still lies within this release version of Metro. But I'd also like to add my own personal thoughts. For one, this is Grigorovich levying complaints of copyright infringement. Lest we forget how GSC got their start in the first place. Something about glass houses. Secondly, the engine and code that is being referred to here, the X-Ray engine, was designed and built by two people, Alexander and Olays. If you may remember, they were the two first people to join Andrew in forming 4A Games. The very engine and code that Sergey was claiming theft of was made by the very people he was throwing that accusation at. There's a reason why Sergey was never able to seek real legal action, and his only way of attack was going to the press to spread gossip. So, I'll leave it at that. This was the last dying breath of a man in his sinking company. A few years later, when this spat had long been forgotten, GSC would be shut down. 4A was the last man standing. The fledgling studio had gone through hell and back. Its developers, through rough working conditions, and through the nightmare of having spent years of their lives working continuously on delayed projects that they were never satisfied with, they finally had a game that was theirs. In March of 2010, having spent nearly 4 years in continuous development and refinement, 4A were able to release their first title on PC and Xbox 360. A completely new audience would find the game sitting on store shelves. A curious new title from an unknown developer with a lot to prove. Gamers popped the disc into their consoles, loaded it up on their PCs, and were pulled into a terrifying but captivating world. Metro 2033 had officially entered the Western zeitgeist. The game and the novel are light on details regarding the war that nearly ended the human race. In canon, it took place in 2013, 20 years before the events of 2033. We can infer that it was between East and West, a nuclear exchange during the very brief World War III, a war that might have only lasted a day, just enough time for ICBMs to strike their targets. Moscow may have only had minutes of warning, and so as sirens blared, citizens flooded into the tunnels, those that could at least. Crowds swarmed down the escalators deep into the tunnels, overwhelming stations up until the bombs dropped. Many were left behind, either atomized by the blast, or left to a darker, more mysterious fate, as the airtight blast doors closed and they were left trapped on the surface. A nuclear winter poisoned the Moscow air, changing the atmosphere, making it toxic, and forcing all biological life to either die or quickly adapt. We don't know much about the world outside of the confines of Moscow, with one notable story being an anecdote of a tank commander communicating with Moscow via radio. He and his men had fled into the forests outside the city, where they tried to survive in a makeshift shantytown before they went dark. Maybe they simply lost contact. Or maybe there was something worse out there lurking in the woods that silenced them. 20 years have passed, and the residents of Moscow have been forced to adapt in their tunnels. The air is stale but breathable. Most stations have become makeshift towns and shanty city-states. Wooden barricades, tents, shacks, these once mighty works of beautiful architecture are now deteriorating under the crowds of survivors trying to make this place their home. As for those dark expanses of tunnels that stretch miles between each station, they are now uncharted, vast networks full of dangers that lurk within the shadows. Bandits, mutants, or things much more terrifying. Humanity now congregates on their own little islands in a sea of darkness. Not to say those stations themselves are beacons of safety or prosperity. If anything, the real danger is lurking within the domains of what's left of mankind. With civilization now in ruins, these stations have formed into their own government city-states. Some are independent, functioning with their own sovereignty, while most others exist under a collective of multiple stations, joined together under a faction either willingly or unwillingly. The notions of territory are gone. Instead, factions fight for control of individual stations, like spaces on a board game. There's a sparse amount of habitable space left, so it's a mad back and forth fight for power. All factions are just fighting to simply survive. And sure, you do have a handful of tense alliances down in the Metro, but everyone is keenly aware these won't last forever. The fighting will always start up again when things get desperate. There are many smaller factions, especially in the book, tiny commonwealths and cults who control a handful of stations near the edge of the city. Artyom's home station, exhibition station, is itself part of a small commonwealth. These communities can cooperate with each other, trading supplies, guns, even men, back and forth to help one another fight back against the outside aggressors or mutants. Some of them do keep to themselves, and some are downright bizarre. The worm cult always stands out to me in the novel, and makes me wish we kinda got to see it in the game. They were in the design document. But when it comes to the major powers in the Metro, beyond these small confederations and commonwealths, there are 5 main factions. Of all the factions in the Metro, Polis is probably the most important. They are an alliance of 4 stations at the heart of the city, a major transfer hub across multiple lines. These 4 stations together work as a singular, massive city-state, ruled by a council made up of ex-military and intelligentsia. They sit right below the Moscow State Library, allowing them to possess pre-war knowledge. Its strategic importance places it in the center of all trade within the Metro, and every other faction has a vested interest in the city not falling. It's the proverbial Minas Tirith. Then there's Hansa, officially known as the Hanseatic League, or by its official title, the Commonwealth of the Stations of the Ring Line. They span the entirety of the circular Koltsai-Via line, so all trade routes must go through Hansa stations, and all merchants must go through Hansa checkpoints. This is how Hansa has become the richest faction in the Metro. It can be described as a hyper-capitalist faction, using its immense wealth and power to maintain a large and powerful army. For as strong as they are, Hansa is very insular, and it uses its military might only really to protect its own vested interests. That being the flow of trade and money. They're happy to let the rest of the underground rot so long as they keep their quarterly profits. The Red Line, a Marxist-Leninist and neo-Stalinist faction, formed by old communist farts who were nostalgic about the glory days of Stalin's purges and Great Terror. In the apocalyptic confines of stations along the Metro's Red Line, the very first Metro line dug out in the 30s, they decided to reenact their great leader's plan of inflicting pain and misery among all of Moscow. They hold the largest amount of territory, and as such they have the largest army in the Metro. However, it's an army that is ill-equipped, full of cannon fodder, with soldiers desperate to flee and defect. The Red Line are hell-bent on rebuilding their Soviet Union as Stalin saw fit, right down to the social repression and complete disregard for human life. When it comes to enemy factions, the Fourth Reich are what you're going to be up against the most. They are a band of neo-Nazis and Russian genetic purists. They see any mutation, no matter how small, as a threat against all Russians. They're also massive wereaboos. They use German titles, German honorifics, German words for their machinery and troops. These guys really wish they were Nazi Germany. They're a very small faction, and they might even be more considered as a well-armed cult. But they shouldn't be scoffed at. Their troops are among the best trained in the Metro, and as of the year 2033, they're practically the only human faction actively establishing outposts on the surface. They're the primary human enemies that you'll encounter, and are among the most well-equipped. For as strong as their soldiers are, they aren't the absolute best in the Metro. The final faction is, of course, the Rangers of the Order, also known as the Spartan Rangers. These guys don't hold any concrete territory. They originally seemed to mostly work out of Polis and other nearby stations, but as of 2033, they've recently established their own base on the surface, Sparta. They'll work alongside other stations and factions, so long as their interests align. They're also the closest thing the Metro has to a contingent of Russia's former military. Much of the Order is made up of former soldiers. Miller, the leader of the Rangers, was himself a member of Russia's military intelligence, likely special forces. As such, the Spartans are incredible soldiers, and despite their small numbers, they are feared across all of the Metro. One single Ranger can wipe out an entire station full of bandits or mutants. The Rangers see themselves as the ones responsible for protecting the Metro, and, if possible, restoring the city to order. It's a big reason why they happily assist Artyom in protecting his home station. Not only do they wish to protect the innocent lives at Exhibition Station, but they also see the immense value in locating and securing the hidden D6 command center, a secure second Metro all to themselves so they can further help rebuild Moscow. If it wasn't evident already, the Rangers are sort of the protagonist faction for you to root for. This is the world the players thrust into. A factional power struggle, some rivalries escalating into war, bandits scavenging lost stations like vultures, and plenty of innocent people caught in the crossfire. But humans aren't the only ones trying to survive in the wastelands of Moscow. Along your journey, you'll be encountering a lot of the local wildlife. Mutants are what you're going to be running into the most, and they come in all shapes and sizes. Giant rats, giant bipedal moles, sentient vines, flying bat-like demons, and those are just the least scary ones. That's sort of the unique thing about the creatures here, is that for each mutant, you could see it evolving from a handful of animals, but not a single one of them sticks entirely. And so you're sort of left scratching your head, trying to deduce how such a mutation could have naturally evolved so quickly, only for that confusion to be thrown out the window when you're actually being chased by them. Like, let's look at a demon. A flying monstrosity with seemingly 6 pairs of limbs, 4 legs including 2 big front claws and a pair of wings. What the hell did this thing even evolve from? In early concept art, you can see that it looked a lot more bat-like, but in the final version, it has a much different appearance. One might be mistaken for thinking this thing isn't even from Earth. Watchers are bizarre too. What are they? Are they mutated dogs? Maybe, but those weird mouths and strange body shapes, plus the long hairless tails. Some people have speculated that they may just be mutated rats. Again, the game doesn't like to make it easy. You aren't just fighting a giant mutated dog or a giant mutated rat. You are instead fighting something that might have been a dog or a rat or a wolf or a mole, but you can't be too sure. That's kind of what I love. The designs for them are really wild and out there, but not too weird, lest we take a glance at the early design documents for this game. The devs here found a really good middle ground between designs that look very bizarre, but also fairly grounded. They're designed in such a way where, after a while, you kind of just accept that they're part of the local wildlife. Mutants are scary, but at the very least familiar. We see a mutant scurry away in the distance, and as uneasy as we may feel, we can at least attach a sense of logic to it. It's just an animal. Hostile if you get too close, but ultimately mindless and acting on instinct. Weird, but natural. Metro gets really scary when you encounter the unnatural. Because in addition to the mutants, both the game and the book hint at a piece of world building which is left entirely up to the player or reader's imagination. That being the world of the supernatural. To compare Metro to her distant half-sister series, Stalker, in that world, all of the seemingly strange supernatural phenomenon are explained entirely through science. Very flimsy and quack science, but science nonetheless. Metro doesn't do that. A lot of these things are unexplained. We have no idea how these mutants formed, or how these anomalies came to be. Our best guess for some of this strange supernatural phenomenon itself relies on an acceptance of that there is more to the universe than our physical world. We're forced to accept things like ghosts and hostile spirits. They're a common occurrence down in the underground, and we're never given a full logical explanation. When you're walking with Khan, he doesn't stop the player and explain that these are actually hallucinations or visions created by some weird scientific entity. Instead, he makes it very clear what we're witnessing is real and we should not interact with it. These are hostile, dangerous phenomena, and the only thing we can really do about it is to just quietly and politely walk past it, lest we anger something beyond our comprehension. It's a really terrifying notion, and one of the big reasons I love Metro. We do occasionally get reality-bending visions and dreams, which it's alluded to are mostly being brought on by the Dark Ones. But aside from that, everything else that we encounter, all the weird and bizarre, unexplainable phenomena, the game makes it pretty clear. This is real. We have no clue how they came to be, at all, but they do exist, and they will kill you if you aren't too careful. Which immediately establishes a sense of dread for whenever you encounter these things by yourself. Because now you have to gauge if what you're looking at is either a mutant, a mindless anomaly, a malignant spirit, or something a lot scarier. This leads most players and readers to the same conclusion. This is more than just radiation. Whatever humanity did to wipe itself out, we did far more than just poisoning the atmosphere. My own personal hypothesis is that the nuclear war wiped out more than just the physical world. We didn't just damage Earth, we broke through reality. How and why that's possible, the game doesn't dwell on it. Perhaps there's an implication that human death and destruction always has an effect on the ethereal, and that going so far as to nearly kill the planet was enough to break it open. This is how the world got flooded with monsters and demons and spirits, and maybe divine beings too. But that's a discussion for later. Suffice to say, the world of Metro is one that is far more than just Geiger counters and overgrown rats. It's a world in defiance of nature and evolution, a world of the supernatural and superstition. In terms of post-apocalyptic fiction, this is where Metro introduces a unique spice to the mix. There are things that lurk in the shadows, whose existence defies all knowable science, and the only explanation left is one that is better left unknown. Whether or not these anomalies and spirits are here naturally or through some incomprehensible breaking of reality, the game will never tell. All that I do know is that it makes for one terrifying world, and it truly makes the player question if the world can ever be salvaged, or if this is our final fate, to die in the dark. Metro to me is easily the one game that comes to mind whenever the meme of how you remember a game versus how it actually looks is mentioned. I remember this game looking stunning, easily within the last 7 or 8 years, and I'm not talking about Redux either. For me, Metro will always be the original 2010 build. It was a mid-7th gen title, and so there is plenty that does hold up, but likewise there's a lot that is very dated. First off, textures are amazingly sharp, especially for a 7th gen Xbox game. Models are very crisp, with the only dated thing about them being things like human faces. I think it also has to do with how they're proportioned in this game. I don't know, the human models here always kind of gave me weird vibes. It's a feeling that I don't have for the sequels. So I think whatever engine they were using just had trouble rendering human characters. That might lend some credence to the whole stolen X-ray engine controversy, but who knows. Environments are another weird thing. Parts of this game jump wildly between looking amazing and then looking very dated. There's lots of rooms that feel very low budget 7th gen, like flat lit rooms, boxy, undetailed corridors, maybe some geometry that looks a little blocky, but then all of a sudden you'll walk out into an area filled to the brim with props and cinematic lighting, or it'll let you walk around the surface and it'll throw the most beautiful post-apocalyptic cityscape imaginable. And this isn't just select levels either. Every mission in the game has areas like this. In some cases, the entire level looks this beautiful all the way through, and you just want to get lost in it. It's not always perfect. If you're seeking it out, you'll absolutely find the seams. But Metro 2033 maintains a very nice level of detail throughout the entire single player. Fidelity is dated in certain parts, but overall the image looks very clear and very crisp. But then we get to lighting. The 7th gen was the era of dynamic lighting. Gone were the pre-baked static lightings of prior gen games. Instead, we had titles showing off their prowess in casting sharp, realistic shadows and colored light sources throughout their environments. Fear, Condemned, Doom 3, Splinter Cell Chaos Theory, Chronicles of Riddick, even a few notable sections of Stalker. Metro was one of the last games I'd consider to be part of this trend, where its environments were usually entirely covered in black shadow, and the only light sources would be a handful of lamps, campfires, fluorescent emergency lights, as well as your flashlight. Dark, pitch black shadows were the focus of Metro, and I think it represents the tail end of this visual style. And this visual style is hard to qualify, but it definitely exists. Anyone who knows it can spot the visual cues I'm referring to. The game's very clever with its use of light and light sources, so even some of the more dated levels in this game look very good. It's down to really nice little artistic details. This dynamic lighting can serve a mechanical purpose as well. I think it's why you see a lot of this crop up in stealth or horror games, because all of a sudden, being able to have a dark environment dynamically react to the player means that you could let the player manipulate it for gameplay purposes, either lighting up the darkness with a flashlight, in the case of horror, or being able to take those light sources away and bathe the environment in darkness, like in stealth. Metro 2033, as a horror and stealth game, would aim to do both. In the design for Metro, 4A decided that a huge focus, not just mechanically but visually, should be lighting. Dark black shadows, hard dynamic light sources, rooms that light up or darken depending on how a player interacts with a light source or maybe even a generator. These are inclusions that work so well. I actually can't believe that there was a point in time where the game might not have had this. It fits so well with Metro, and it kind of feels wrong to imagine the game without these gimmicks. Candles can be blown out. If there's a light hanging from the ceiling, just shoot it to quickly darken a room. All of a sudden, what seems like a graphical gimmick becomes a pretty important stealth mechanic to sneak around enemies or to get the drop on them. On the flip side, light is helpful for keeping you away from the things that lurk within those shadows. Things far more terrifying than humans with guns. So there are areas where you feel safe in the light, because you know that nothing can sneak up on you. This includes using your flashlight, which ingeniously ties into a mechanic in the game where you're forced to pump it to keep it charged. Metro having this type of dynamic lighting just makes so much sense, and it's fair to say this is what holds up tremendously well 15 years later. Metro isn't all timeless though. The last time I ran this game a few years ago, I did notice some hiccups here and there, but on newer hardware, it's becoming unavoidable. Animations are glitching out, objects moving in bizarrely low tick rates, objects within animations not finishing properly. Yeah, look at this floating cup. And I hate to rag on this game's engine, so I'll end it on one last thing which has bugged me even way back from when this game came out. The flickering lights of candles, campfires, and old light bulbs just feels wrong. What clearly happened is that the art team wanted light sources made by fire or maybe a flickering light bulb to seem more natural and realistic. So instead of making it a static light source, they gave it this shifting color hue, going between things like deep oranges and bright yellows, mimicking how a dark room would look if it was lit only by a single flame, or maybe by an old Soviet-era incandescent bulb. However, I feel this color choice was way too invasive. This isn't natural bounce lighting that you see as flames dance around a fire, nor is it a natural but slightly flickering light source in a dark area that you would expect, say, in real life. It's an artificial pulse, and it is fast and it is constant. So it becomes distracting, and what would have been a cozy environment becomes a little overwhelming. It's a minor nitpick, but one that can be found throughout the entire game. So the graphics are a little dated. They hold up in some parts, not so much in others. It's almost like Metro was running off an engine held together by duct tape. If I could point to one thing that truly is timeless about Metro 2033, it has to be the art direction. This is what really does most of the heavy lifting, especially for the time that it came out in. Most of the game is set in the dark, pitch black underground tunnels illuminated by campfires, lanterns, or fluorescent lights that are still working decades after the surface has been destroyed. These environments don't give much in the way of color. They're very reliant on the few specifically placed light sources on a level. So there's lots of harsh directional lighting, usually the warm fiery glow of a lamp, or harsh whites, reds, and yellows of a fluorescent light in a deep maintenance tunnel. However, the further you get away from a station, the more you come across bioluminescent fungi. Mushrooms that glow bright green or blues, maybe deep pits with greenish-blue mist. With how dilapidated some of these tunnels are, you may even catch a glimpse of daylight, giving the environment a soft, pale blue ambiance. If you ever get to the surface, good luck finding any sunlight. It is dark and overcast, gray skies and a colorless winter environment. At most, you'll get hints of blues and greens, lots of cold color hues. Beyond lighting and color, 4A went through a ton of effort modeling and designing Artyom's journey through Moscow. They reconstructed iconic buildings and locations, all from the path that Artyom takes in his adventure. This is a journey centered around real, identifiable locations and landmarks. These are real places that need to not just be recreated, but they have to have an additional layer of grime and destruction added to them. They need to be given 20 years of apocalyptic wear and tear. I feel the developers took a lot of inspiration from the sci-fi that they and Glukhovsky grew up with. I mentioned Stalker and Dead Man's Letters earlier, and in terms of environment design, there's a lot of borrowing from both of those films. With Stalker, you get these underground tunnels and dark rooms which are purposefully lit, usually with cold pale blues and misty wet fog. For Dead Man's Letters, sure, you get a lot of obvious superficial homages and similarities, but you also get the exaggerated portrayal of the apocalyptic surface, a toxic junkyard full of rubble, buildings lay in crumbled piles with jagged pieces of metal sticking out from the ground. The few buildings left standing are either flooded or littered with debris. It feels like the ground has practically opened up and that the city is sinking in on itself. Maybe it's a reflection of how the city's inhabitants moved underground themselves, and now the city is metaphorically digging down to follow them. There's an exaggeration to the destruction. The bleak, overcast sky even makes the game look monochrome in parts. It's an overwhelming lack of color. And that's just the surface. Most of the game takes place underground, and you'll visit a ton of metro stations. Stations that have real-life counterparts. The book describes these stations not as regular subway platforms, but as towns, marketplaces, cities, fortresses, which is easy to do in writing. Let the reader imagine how they think these towns might look. But for the game designers, this is a real challenge bringing it to 3D. The environment artists have to not only replicate these real-life metro stations as best as they can, but they also have to make them look like they could feasibly support a settlement of humans living in them. I can't imagine the stress of getting these reference photos back, seeing these subway tunnels, and being told, make this a town, with houses, a bar, and a marketplace. In that regard, the environment artists restricted themselves in much the same way as the fictional denizens of the metro would have. When the station you're fleshing out into a city already exists, well, then you have to build within its confines. You can't just expand the town, you're restricted to the concrete and ceramic walls of pre-war architecture. Metro often gets mocked by its detractors for being the ultimate corridor shooter. It's a world all about tunnels. It's in the title. But I think calling Metro a series of hallways and corridors really does it a disservice, because it really doesn't take into account just how meticulous the designers were in crafting their world. These aren't generic hallways or corridors. These are towns. That tunnel you're walking through is the back alley through some people's homes. That cramped room is a hangout spot where old-timers sit around a fire and tell stories. That maintenance tunnel is a heavily guarded checkpoint at the edge of the city limits. That hallway is an abandoned rail car that has been converted into cramped housing. Everything needed to keep a micro-society running is accounted for. Food, hygiene, trade, transport, entertainment. You can tell that an insane amount of thought has been put into the practicality of how a station's city-state would go about surviving this long. It's what I love about Metro's world, which is how everything feels lived in and practical. I won't mention other post-apocalyptic games, but I will say that designing and building a post-apocalyptic settlement low on resources on the brink of collapse is a hard thing to pull off. I think the level designers went above and beyond. They had built out a world that had only previously existed on the pages of a book. Fleshing out the idea of a world in which humanity lives in the subway tunnels and turning it into a full-fledged underground society is no easy feat. Each station has been expertly crafted, each one reflecting the faction that controls it. These really feel like underground micro-communities, and in a lot of cases, you sometimes forget that you're wandering through a metro tunnel. Wooden shacks and homes are built up over concrete and marble floors. Subway platforms are packed to the brim with little shanty towns, and the remnants of their classical architecture can only really be seen peeking through the buildings. Train tracks have been built over and are formed into tiny little shantytown neighborhoods. Every inch of space is fought over, even extending out into the tunnels themselves. Humanity has had to build along the confines of the metro system, flowing with its curves and through its antiquated Soviet design. Side hallways have to be converted into hospitals, cross passages turned into secure offices for station leaders. The central hall is filled with merchant stands, while the pylons on either side serve as natural dividers between various vendors. Areas can be so dense with shantytown structures and buildings that you can sometimes forget that you're still within the confines of a metro station, usually until you get a glimpse of the tiled or marbled wall, or maybe glance up at the ceiling and see the remnants of old Stalin-era architecture. With how hostile the outside world is, these stations have had to turn themselves into self-sustaining fortresses. Railways are covered in barricades. They're guarded by turret emplacements. Pressure-sealed doors are guarded heavily by soldiers afraid of anyone looking to attack their station, either from neighboring hostile factions or from the surface. There's an ominous feeling when you step out of a station and you see the escalator leading up to the surface. All of a sudden, that dark, cramped station feels a lot more welcoming than the bright winter daylight calling for you from the surface. It's a striking visual, the bright world above calling you, seeming far more treacherous than the dark and scary tunnels below. Metro ultimately is an attempt to combine a few different styles of game into one, mainly being action, stealth, and horror. It's a narrow window of games that have attempted this. Maybe a combination of two of them, sure, but all three, there's not many games that have pulled that off. It's here that Metro is unique. where level to level the game will routinely shift its balance, away from one side of the theoretical triangle over to another corner. The way Metro was designed, in various chapters split into distinct levels, you can feel the tone shift and change from mission to mission. Level designers will decide to focus on one or two elements at the same time. It's an interesting bit of game design, and when you map it out, you can actually see how the game is balanced overall. Oh yeah, heavy on the action, the horror, and only a little bit on the stealth. So let's talk about it. Metro at its core is a first-person shooter. It's about shooting anything that moves, crawls, breathes, or looks at you funny. You need your guns. In the world of Metro, firearms are still being built, alongside other, more unique alternatives to ballistic weaponry. Bullets are a way of life down in the tunnels, so you'll be using a wide mixture of familiar yet slightly odd-looking guns, which have since gone on to become series staples. Metro is littered with pipe guns. Things like makeshift double-barrel shotguns, which are useful in a tight pinch if you have nothing else, or the much maligned SMG. Cheap, inaccurate, made from scrap. It has been dubbed by the Metro populace as the Bastard. The Shambler is a Metro staple, and it's quite possibly the most recognizable gun in the trilogy. A semi-auto revolving shotgun. It's a well-liked and decently reliable weapon that can help you face even the toughest foes the games will throw at you. Just be warned, once your magazine empties, it takes time to fully reload. Time which you may not have. Things like revolvers and AKs are immediately recognizable. Cold War era weaponry that is still surviving down in the ruins of the 2030s. However, if you cozy up to wealthier stations, or perhaps the Rangers, you might get your hands on nicer gear and equipment, particularly the VSV, a silenced VSK, perfect for those who wish for a stealthier approach. Or, for when things get really hairy, grab a Kalash 2012. Russia's new top-of-the-line bullpup assault rifle, introduced just a year before the war. As such, it's fairly uncommon, but deadly and effective in the hands of the few who wield it. A top-loading magazine gives the Kalash a large ammo count, which, paired with its excellent accuracy and fire rate, makes this gun the best rifle down in the Metro. Where these weapons really come into their own, however, is the variety of attachments, different optics, extended stocks, modified barrels, even a bayonet. All of a sudden, a gun's intended purpose switches to a more niche role. The revolver is the best showcase at this, a fairly decent 6-round sidearm at the beginning of the campaign. However, through your journeys, you may stumble across heavily modified variants, revolvers with suppressors or a longer barrel, connected to an extended buttstock adorned with a scope. What was once a close-range secondary now becomes a useful long-range primary, good for sniping or for stealth or even both. On the topic of stealth, if ballistics are too loud and too clumsy for you, the game offers quite a few alternatives. Pneumatic guns were a unique inclusion in 2033's weapon lineup. The Tihar is an air gun that fires 15mm ball bearings. Its firing mechanism is reliant on a compressed air canister, which requires regular pumping after use. You can fire this thing rapid fire too. However, every subsequent shot has progressively lower velocity. It's just a mechanic to keep you pumping this thing constantly. It's best utilized in short one-on-one engagements. It's a completely silent gun, so it's recommended to wait and use this gun for when you can pick off a single enemy. The other pneumatic weapon is the Helsing, an 8-barrel bolt launcher. Just like before, you're required to regularly pump it to keep its pressure high. It's not quite as long range. However, it makes up for it with its ammunition. Large steel rods. They are much more expensive than the cheap ball bearings, but they deliver a deadly punch at medium to close range. They can also be re-retrieved off a dead body, and so on higher difficulties, especially Ranger mode, the Helsing becomes a well-liked, cost-effective stealth weapon. We're not quite finished talking about Metro's guns. For the Ranger DLC, 2 additional weapons were added to the campaign. A heavy belt-fed automatic shotgun, and an electromagnetically accelerated volt driver. Both of these guns were given to you near the end of the game, and they're fun little power weapons against the heavy wave of mutants that get thrown at you. But mutants aren't the only thing that you're going to be shooting at, and there's many enemies down in the tunnels that will be shooting back at you. The story revolves around a faction war, so you'll be encountering all manner of tunnel dwellers. Loosely organized bandits living in quiet empty tunnels, or more heavily armored and organized military forces. The dead bodies of soldiers, stalkers, or bandits can be looted for goodies, so you can always keep an eye out for MGRs. That's military grade rounds. This does tie in a bit with level design, but you will be heavily encouraged to deviate from the main path forward, just to look for little stashes full of ammo and supplies. Doing so can reward you with extra magazines, health kits, or just a better gun. But you're mainly looking for bullets. You see, for as much as this game loves its loud, action-packed gunfights, it also really wants the player to be considering ammo management. There's not an inventory screen here. Ammo types all have their own storage in your backpack. You can pick up as many bullets as you want per ammo type so long as you're within the limit. This is of course offset by the game's brutal economy. Bullets throughout most of the game, up until the last couple chapters, are important to hoard. In the apocalypse, we don't need your paper money. The real currency here are the MGRs. Military grade rounds are accepted as a tradable resource at every station. This is the de facto currency, and it's what you're going to be using to buy new weapons, supplies, even exchanging it for other bullets. Those MGRs might seem like a nice secondary pool of bullets, but that's your wallet that you're shooting with. You don't have a 401k to rely on in 2033, so you need to save. It plays like an action game, but this survival element is looming over every single enemy encounter, because ammo isn't always fully restocked. In a regular action FPS, you'll go through a long level of shooting baddies, and then you'll be given some extra ammo for your troubles, just so you're prepared for the next level. That doesn't happen in Metro. One bad, prolonged gunfight early on can have disastrous ramifications hours down the line as you struggle to recoup those losses. And we're not even talking about Ranger difficulty, which is so bad at handing you out bullets, you're better off just using your knife. So the answer seems obvious. If starting a gunfight is too risky, why not just ignore them altogether? And this is where we arrive at the coup de grace of Metro's unique, weird, and janky gameplay mechanics: stealth. It represents a significant part of the game, being a core mechanic that a lot of the systems are designed around. The series would definitely refine it throughout its later entries, but even in 2033, you can see the desire was absolutely there, not just to make this as an optional feature, but as a viable progression strategy. Do they pull it off? I think yes and no. For starters, you have light and shadow. Like I mentioned, this was a big graphical focus for 4A's engine. They wanted light to have a direct effect on a player's visibility. And this was something games had been doing since Thief. The difference here was that lighting would be entirely dynamic. Those well-lit areas could be plunged into darkness with a well-placed shot, or by simply fiddling with the light source. It's fun to shoot bulbs and lanterns and watch the entire room turn to pitch black. When you do take out a light source, if an enemy is too close, they will notice it. And then some levels will let you turn off a generator, which will shut off or destroy all the light sources within a small area. Once you do step into the shadows, you'll see that Artyom's watch will go green. This means that he's completely invisible to enemies. You need to be within kissing distance before they actually notice you. In dimly lit areas, the watch will go yellow, meaning Artyom is not completely hidden, but if he's a decent distance away or just barely out of their cone of vision, enemies will have a hard time seeing him. Red means that he's fully exposed out in the open, so enemies will instantly spot him if they glance his direction. So the goal here seems clear. Keep your flashlight off and stick to the shadows. And if there are none, make them yourself. Take out light sources, turn off generators, blow out lamps. The darkness is your ally in these missions, so you have to utilize it. If an enemy does notice that you've turned out a room's lights, they'll begin to investigate. They'll flip on their headlamps, which can completely expose you if they're too close. So you want to be careful if they have their flashlights out. Once you're hidden, now what? Well, levels in Metro are pretty simple. You're almost always moving from one area to another, especially in these stealth sections. You really just need to get to the end of the level. And in that regard, the path seems pretty clear. Wait for enemies to pass, slip between their patrols, and stick to the shadows as you head towards the exit. But it's never that simple. These guys are prepared for some idiot to try sneaking through their camp. So, they've set up some traps. Broken glass, cans hanging on a string. They've also put up some more elaborate Home Alone style traps, like tripwires hooked up to grenades, or tripwires hooked up to giant wooden spike traps. In addition, another thing that keeps you from just running to the end of the level is the fact that all of these environments are jam-packed with secret goodies. MGRs, ammo, guns, good equipment, they're all hidden out of the way. And these can be incredibly useful, stuff that you can't buy at a market. Something like night vision goggles requires you to go to a completely out of the way spot just to acquire them. So you can choose to just book it to the end of the level, but that just means losing out on some really good gear. You need to scavenge what you can get. This means that for some areas you won't be able to move silently. Enemies may be guarding these caches, so you gotta get rid of them. The game introduces you to throwing knives really early on. It's always a tried and true method throughout the game. Mostly. Of course, that's a single enemy we're talking about. A lot of patrols are made up of 2, 3, maybe even 4 or 5-man squads. Some of them follow their scripted patrol, which puts them just barely out of range of their buddies. But some of them would rather sit right next to their friend, preventing you from getting a clean kill. Throwing knives are slow to throw. This is where a silenced gun comes in handy. A silenced revolver, VSV, or go for a pneumatic gun, such as the Helsing or the Tihar. You can shoot a silenced weapon pretty close to enemies before they notice. And keep in mind, all of this is optional. If you want, you can absolutely go guns blazing through most of these levels. Metro is not explicitly a stealth game. It is partially. It has those elements to allow a player to be quiet and sneaky. Areas that disincentivize going loud and instead encourage players to move through a level quietly. But that is usually a rarity. There's actually not that many levels that are entirely up against human enemies. Most of the time it's up against mutants, and with those you usually have no choice but to go guns blazing. I always found that kind of odd. For a series that was iconic for its approach to stealth, it's weird to consider that the first game in the series only really has stealth available for a handful of levels, enough to be counted on one hand. It is also important to recognize the year Metro came out in. 2010 was not the year for stealth games. Aside from Assassin's Creed games, which I don't really count, as well as a portable MGS game for the PSP, the only other explicit stealth game to come out in 2010 would be Splinter Cell Conviction, a series whose prior entries created the mechanics that Metro heavily borrows from. Yet Conviction is regarded by many as being the worst in the entire series, thanks to it playing more like a third-person Gears of War clone. Metro 2033, simply by having decent stealth mechanics as well as a few good levels for players to sneak through, it was a breath of fresh air for gamers who are looking for stealth games. Combine that with the game's higher difficulty mode, which encourages being sneaky and avoiding gunfights, and you had a good chunk of Metro fans who loved it for these areas over the rest of the game. And I'd be hard-pressed to disagree with them. These are the game's best levels. There's 4 of them. Maybe 4.5 if you count that section of Lost Tunnels. But for these 4 areas, you can get through pretty much entirely without alerting a single enemy. Perhaps it's my bias, but these levels are the best in Metro. They're huge, intricate environments full of secret areas and rooms for the player to hide in or sneak through. They're genuinely the highlight of the entire game, thanks to how open they are. And that exploration makes them feel somewhat non-linear. I think that's where Metro 2033 especially pulled off these sections well, where even later games, Metro or otherwise, might not have. Thrown in stealth mechanics are common in shooters these days. Crouch and waltz through an area, hold a knife and then you can backstab and silently kill people with a button prompt. It's now less about keeping quiet and more about waiting for an enemy to have their back turned, just so you can crouch walk over to them and shiv them. Not to say this type of gameplay isn't fun. It can be, in its own right. I appreciate games that provide players with the option of sneaking through a level, or better yet, games where you can silently kill every single enemy in sight, which is basically my OCD. But I feel Metro 2033 has a leg up thanks to its non-linear approach to stealth in a lot of these arenas. These are environments where you can completely sneak through a level through multiple pathways. There isn't one definitive way to beat Black Station, or one definitive route to take on front lines. You have multiple paths actually, some better than others, but all of them being fairly viable just depending on your strategy. In fact, for as much as I love the later games, I do feel the approach in making these sections more linear might have been a step back. 2033 stealth may not be the entire focus of the game, but it offers up plenty of fun areas for people who just love this playstyle. That all being said, we can't just not address how janky some of these mechanics really are. The reason stealth as a genre is hard to break into is because you really need to know what you're doing. If you want players to be able to sneak past enemies, you need to program your AI perfectly so that it's just dumb enough to provide players a chance to sneak by, but also not too stupid so that the game feels like a cakewalk. Even among the best stealth games, they all differ in how they handle their AI. And in fact, I don't think there's a single stealth game in existence that doesn't have a small fraction of haters who dislike it just because it does something slightly different or unique. For every stealth game that someone loves, there's another person who thinks that stealth game is either too easy or too bullshit. When it comes to your favorite stealth game, it really is just because you've acquired a taste for its particular mechanics. And boy, oh boy, Metro is the final boss when it comes to an acquired taste. Later Metro entries would refine these mechanics, and they would definitely enhance them, making it feel seamless as opposed to here in 2033, where it feels way more experimental than anything else. There's only 4 levels dedicated to it, and I think that might have been intentional. I can't imagine 4A was completely satisfied in their stealth mechanics, with the janky knife throwing, or the unpredictable enemy AI that would sometimes spot you before you even spawned in a level. It was an experimental mechanic. I think they were worried that if the entire game revolved around it, then the entire game would flounder. I think that's the way you really need to understand Metro. Metro is a stealth game. What it isn't is just a stealth game. It's also an action game and a horror game. So the action is pretty good, but a little flawed. The stealth is very good, but very flawed. How's the horror? Is it flawed as well? If I'm being honest, I think it's nearly flawless. Nearly. With Metro, the game definitely leans on more action horror in terms of tone. This is where the game likes to spend most of its time, giving you adrenaline rushes before throwing you into echoing silence. As you walk through a tunnel, hearing distant sounds of what might be either a pipe leak or a creature growling at you, you're gonna keep doing 180s, checking your back, looking around corners, trying to find any hint of something that might be lurking in the shadows. All the while, you can only listen to Artyom's strained breathing as you lose yourself in the ambiance. I think these moments are so impactful because a lot of horror games, action or otherwise, struggle when it comes to building tension without blowing their load prematurely. So what often happens is it can sometimes feel like a developer has run out of scares early on, so you're forced to re-experience the same ghoul jumping out at you throughout the rest of the game, where those scares just start to fall flat. See my Doom 3 video for an example of this happening. This is probably why shorter games are more popular in this genre. As a game approaches the length of something like Metro, it becomes really important that the developers utilize variety and an ever-changing series of mechanics to keep things fresh. Things like gimmicks can be introduced, but shouldn't overstay their welcome. Give them time to breathe. But when the player is just about familiar enough with them, throw us something else. Keep things unpredictable, and you have a decently paced horror game. It sounds easy on paper, but it's not in practice. It's hard to pace out a game when you don't know what mechanics players will like, which ones they won't. Add to that the idea that developers are fleshing out a full game mechanic just for it to only be used in a few levels, never to be used for the rest of the game. There's a reason why assets are made to be reusable. It's so the devs don't have to start from scratch on every single level. And it's in this regard that I think 4A did a commendable job. And I found that a lot of the scares in Metro aren't just from the same few mutants jumping out at you from a monster closet, but rather it's the stress of anticipation for what's around the next corner. What twisted level you'd be thrown into next. And this is because of something that Metro has. Something that all of the other best action horror games also have. It's restraint. As a developer, it would seem very easy to just constantly throw the same enemies at the player over and over, just to keep them on edge from start to finish. But just like repetitious level gimmicks, it will wear thin very quickly. This is what pacing is for, to make sure that the game doesn't feel too relentless. Because when it does, then a player stops feeling scared, and instead they start to feel frustrated or exhausted. The best horror titles, for as relentless as they might feel, always break things up with huge amounts of downtime. For as much as you remember the intensity from these games, you might forget just how much silence there was in between each scare. Those moments of puzzle solving in Resident Evil or Silent Hill. Those military jargon lore dumps in Fear. The detective sequences in Condemned. Hell, even Left 4 Dead, a game all about creating tension through swarms of endless zombie hordes, has an AI director explicitly designed to slow the pace of the game down when players need a breather. Good horror in general, needs moments for you to catch your breath. And don't mistake my words, these aren't moments for you to relax either. They're just slower moments, quieter moments, moments to maybe let tension build, letting an audience settle before the next scare. Because sometimes the scariest thing a game can do is put you in your own head. Because it may seem like nothing's happening, but is that really the case? Something Metro does amazingly, even through its most tense sections. Beyond this, the player is forced to be alert. I'll also add that the reason these quiet moments work especially well for Metro is due to the fact that it is an action horror game. If Metro were less interactive, if the player had less agency, these moments might not feel as intense as they should. And we all know these types of games, your theme park horror games, where there's very little need for you to even defend yourself. The developer just wants you to sit quietly and watch as these monsters jump out at you. For an action horror game, you're not a helpless audience member. You have ways to defend yourself. And so, you must also be vulnerable. Such as when you first walk through the dead city. You have to navigate through the twisted ruins of these streets and buildings. All the while, these watchers are stalking you from a distance, making occasional rushes at you. The level defense has Artyom navigating through a destroyed metro station, all the while these little lurkers keep crawling out of holes and taking bites at your ankle. These sections are unique because you aren't a helpless lamb looking for a place to hide. You have the tools to deal with most mutants, so the agency of protecting yourself is thrown entirely into your hand, which makes these levels more intense. The player knows that they have to defend themselves or they will die, and the developers know that too. It's why they give you a limited amount of ammo or grenades or health kits. Conserving these resources becomes key to survival. In a twisted way, this makes the scavenging that I mentioned earlier all the more important. Since those extra bullets will go a long way later on, you can't breeze through these levels. You have to go through them slowly, because for as terrified as you are, you need to scavenge as much as you can. All the while, the longer you loiter, the more likely it is that some unseen creature is going to sneak up on you. The game also does an excellent job making you feel completely out of your element. Humanity is at the bottom of the food chain. This is not our world anymore. We don't belong here. It's a bizarre Pavlovian response where the tunnels become even more appealing the longer you stay on the surface. Because for as terrifying as they are, they beat having every angle around you exposed from all directions. And this is the tone for much of the game. Heart-pounding action as wave after wave of monstrosities throw themselves at your bullets, as you go through each magazine after magazine until things start getting desperate. And then, it's silence. Unnerving silence. You're waiting for that next mutant to come around the corner, but they don't. Metro knows when to quiet things down, and it loves to lull you into a sense of utter creepiness, where all of a sudden, that heart-pounding action becomes more preferable to this right now. As you walk through, you begin thinking to yourself, should I be quiet? Should I go through this quietly? Am I hiding from something? And it's always a non-zero chance too. Things like anomalies, whispers, ghosts, areas that bend reality. They're all potential threats that you can face in the ruins of Moscow. There are things lurking out there that the player has no understanding of. And it's this tense quietness that makes the game as scary as it is. There's a reason why the library is so well remembered, and why it's worth dissecting. When old games are brought up, there's a word that I hear around thrown callously, often misattributed to titles that don't deserve it as a moniker. The word clunky. People like that word. A little too much. At this point, people use it to describe games that are simply missing a handful of modern mechanics or features. This game doesn't have ADS. This game doesn't have sprint. Then it's clunky. As a clunky connoisseur myself, I get tired of seeing this word thrown around, especially when it's thrown at games that hold up remarkably well, just because a bunch of younger Zoomers are put off by how it doesn't handle identically to a modern shooter. I think the word is slowly losing meaning, and people are wearing it down. I preface all of this just to say that Metro 2033 is the true definition of clunky. And whenever I use the word, this is the level of clunkiness that I'm referring to. With 4A releasing 2 sequels and 1 remake, it's easy to forget 2033's original shortcomings. But as an adult with 15 years of hindsight, I can definitely say this is truly one clunky ass game. Movement feels weird. A lot of the time it feels like you're gliding on ice and that you aren't properly planted to the ground. Jumping over objects feels downright glitchy. Prepare to keyboard mash if you ever get stuck. If you're crouching through a narrow space, you can feel your body nearly get stuck as it brushes against the wall. Artyom has some supernatural level of friction on his body. Come on, get in there. Get in. Oh no! And we haven't even talked about the combat. Gunfights have some odd quirks. First, I'm not sure who 4A Games hired as a weapon designer, because whoever it was, I want to have a stern conversation with them about the quality of optics that they use. Any scope in this game has a weird foggy haze over the lens at all times. It's hard to use in the dark, and it's impossible to use while in night vision. And it ultimately makes itself a liability, as you're struggling half the time to even make out what you're shooting at. Enemies aren't clearly defined either. These are soldiers wearing dark gray and black armor with various pieces of straps, coats, belts, and bandoliers. You aren't scoping in on a bright blue alien. You're scoping in on a guy wearing black and gray in a level whose color palette is black and gray. Now you just have a fogged up optic or scope just to make it impossible to see if you're even landing your shots. And of course, we reach the ultimate clunk of 2033, the stealth mechanics. For as much as I love 2033's mechanics, especially when it comes to sneaking around and letting the player take out entire squads of enemies in complete silence, I am equally frustrated by its weird decisions. How sometimes blowing out a candle quietly will cause all enemies to instantly be on high alert, but shooting out a light bulb and hearing it make the loudest fucking glass pop sound effect, and not a single enemy even knows you're there. Also, remember how I said that stealth in Metro revolves around silenced weapons and especially throwing knives? Well, one little thing I failed to mention is that a single missed shot or knife throw that isn't a kill shot is all it takes for an enemy to scream out and for the entire level full of baddies to pinpoint your exact location. Likewise, you can still kill someone in a single shot, and sometimes they'll just let out an annoying death scream, and now everyone knows exactly where you are. Keep in mind, some of these enemies are covered head to toe in body armor. Now, if you're a good shot, you can aim head on or at the back of their head right below their helmet, right along their neck. This will instantly kill them. But if you miss, whoops, you just pinged off their helmets. Have fun going loud. Even throwing knives aren't immune to this. Time to reload a checkpoint. Yeah, get used to doing this a lot. Reloading back to a checkpoint because there are no quick saves, and the checkpoint system is not the greatest. Oh hey, these guys decide to randomly aggro and spot me for no reason. Time to reload the entire level. Sometimes enemies will just randomly detect you too. Maybe they happen to see the foot of a dead body you left behind. Yeah, no body moving mechanic by the way. You better hope that the person you just killed falls into a spot that's out of the way. And some levels like Outpost are really annoying for new players because enemies will spawn in as you hit certain points in the level. So you'll mistakenly think that an area is completely clear because you can't hear anyone, only for them to just spawn in out of fucking nowhere inside the same building that you're in and immediately start shooting. The AI here is unpredictable at best. Sometimes enemies will give you the benefit of the doubt and will let you sneak on by. Other times they have the vision of a hawk and will dump a hailstorm of bullets on you because you got too close. I think that's the frustrating part about Metro, is that the features are nearly there. Mechanics and gameplay that all work together very well and are, on their own, well crafted and well thought out. However, there's just a thin layer of jank that's preventing all of it from feeling quite timeless. It's this layer of jank that I feel keeps Metro 2033 from appealing to a wider audience, which isn't necessarily its goal. I think the single player holds up remarkably well in terms of story, level design, combat, stealth, horror, and it's this campaign that I really want to dissect and talk about. What 4A did was seamlessly weave in the story from the book into something that fits perfectly in an FPS action game. 2033 is a journey, and I think it's worth talking about. So strap in. We're going through Metro 2033's long campaign as well as its very interesting and thought-provoking story. Artyom's journey actually begins with a prologue. A little flash forward to near the end of the game, with Artyom and Miller meeting up with a group of rangers. You have no idea who any of these characters are yet, but you have a little action sequence where you get to hold out against watchers and demons. I'm still not entirely sure why this section's in the game. My only guess is that I think the devs wanted a big action sequence to open the game with, because otherwise the regular opening of the game was kind of a weak tutorial section and then just a very quiet, ambient, wandering around section. I hope it wasn't exactly that cynical, but that's always been my interpretation. Kind of like a reassurance for all the bro dudes and game journos who picked up this game. Like, no, this game plays like an action shooter later on, just please stick with it. Atmospherically, it's great. A winter storm raging outside this concert hall, which is a real building, by the way. This whole area is supposed to be a real location too. The base of the television tower, which becomes a big focus point in the game. This swarm effect with a herd of watchers circling you is pretty seamless. I will say it is a good hook for the game, even if I assume it's just there to have players know this is still an action game, please don't turn it off too early. It's also a good level where you can test your mouse sensitivity, which is a real problem on PC. Yeah, this is another thing I failed to mention. If you ever get a PC copy of Metro 2033, you're gonna have to be doing a lot of tinkering for getting it working. Alright, who cares? We're thrown back 8 days prior. This is the real start of the game. Artyom lounging in his room when Alex, his adoptive father, greets us, and he tells us that a friend of his, Hunter, is waiting for both of us, which gives us the true proper opening to Metro 2033. A jaunt through Artyom's home exhibition station. I like the little bits of characterization for Artyom here. He seems to be very inquisitive and also kind of innocent. Artyom himself is usually left as a stoic player insert. We definitely get a lot more of his character in the book. That's just the nature of making a video game versus a novel. So I like the little touches here. Keep in mind, Artyom was only an infant when the bombs fell, so he has no memories of the surface world. The Metro is the only world he's ever known. So to him, collecting things like postcards are a way for him to live vicariously through a world he never got to experience. To him, the world is only what he knows through pictures and reading them through books. He also happens to have a copy of, Yeah, I always found it really funny how throughout all of the games, the novels are shoved into every possible corner that the devs can throw them in. Sometimes it doesn't even feel appropriate. Well, we get our first opportunity to walk around Exhibition Station. In real life and in the novel, it's called Vidinha, which itself is an abbreviation. The developers shortened it to Exhibition in-game. It's easier to say, and it goes with the theme that a lot of the metro stations have short nicknames as people continue to live there, which I kinda like. Either way, there's one thing that should be noted about Exhibition Station. It exists at the furthest extent of its metro line. It's one of the edges of underground civilization, if you can even call it civilized. There are no settlements beyond Exhibition on this rail line, and as such, it's a location constantly bombarded by mutant threats from the outside. Hospitals are packed full of wounded men. Soldiers low on supplies and ammo. There is a sense of dread here. Exhibition is one bad day from being completely wiped off the map. They need to barter with other stations to get more men or supplies, especially with an approaching new threat. The game opens with you getting to experience some of these attacks, from mutants and from something else that's lurking around on the surface. It's a good area to pay attention to the side dialogue, because you actually learn quite a bit that the game doesn't outright tell you.
The Dark Ones will kill us all.
Yeah, the Dark Ones, a type of mutant that we have very little information about, which are seemingly doing a very effective job at taking out all of our defense outposts. They demonstrate some level of intelligence, and the effect they have on their victims is nightmarish, mentally scarring survivors, scrambling their brains until they eventually die from exhaustion. The airlock. We get to meet Hunter, who's giving himself a cool entrance pose. He's a ranger, who we can infer has a history with Alex and Artyom. He's here to help evaluate the situation at Exhibition and to hopefully report back to his order so they can maybe send us some aid. The Rangers aren't elaborated on at this point, but we can quickly infer that if they're all like Hunter, then they're a pretty valuable ally to have. But our reunion is interrupted by an attack. No solaces start crawling out of the vents, and we have to fend them off with a single revolver. I actually think this little section is why the prologue exists. At some point, I imagine this was the first weapon tutorial in the game. Either way, it's there to teach the player how to use a revolver, as well as how to deal with being in a cramped area where oncoming enemies can't be easily avoided, especially when you only have 6 rounds to spare. Yeah, our dad goes off on a weird philosophical rant. It's just dad things. You know how they are.
The Dark Ones are not simple mutants. They're Homo Novus, the next step in evolution. You've heard about survival of the fittest? Guess what? We lost.
Exhibition is on its last legs. We are not going to survive until we get outside help. Yeah, Alex seems a bit out of it. Hunter doesn't care though. He's committed to saving Exhibition. And to do so, he's going to need our help. Artyom is given his mission. Get to Polis. Deliver this message to a man named Miller. Bring the cavalry to save our home. And that's the overarching goal of this game. Get to Polis, defeat the Dark Ones. And we have one final chance to explore more of the station. And we actually get to see some of the nicer parts here. Vendor stands, more homes, people chatting over a meal, soldiers relaxing between shifts, a few kids who seem distressingly oblivious to the horror around them. Some livestock, some supplies being offloaded. Exhibition is very reliant on outside trade, with how far from the center of the metro they are. The station further up the line, Riga, has been sending in troops to help as well. This is almost certainly because Riga, and presumably stations later down the line, are all aware that once Exhibition Station falls, they're the next line of defense. It's not stated in-game, but the novel makes it clear. Exhibition Station wasn't the original edge of the metro. There was another station that used to exist further up north, whose community got completely wiped out years prior. As for the station itself, the developers did an amazing job. It's actually kind of shocking just how much detail went into it. Things like its iconic chandeliers were lifted 1-to-1 from the station in real life. I'm not an architect, so forgive me for any misused terminology, but best as I can tell, this is a pylon tri-vaulted station. Tri-vault refers to the 3 parallel vaulted ceilings across 3 different tunnels, 2 platforms and a central hall, interconnected between large, thick pylons. You see this design a lot in Moscow's tunnel systems. What's funny is these sections I think bored me a bit as a teenager, but as I get older, I find these to be some of the best parts of the game. They're thick with atmosphere, and it's really fun just to see how these people are surviving in the worst, horrific conditions possible. That's the little thing with Metro, is no matter how bad things get, there's always just a little bit of hope left for humanity to hold on to. Well, Artyom's got his destination, so after saying goodbye to his father, he's off to join a caravan.
Hey guys, going to Riga?
Yeah, we are.
Can I get a lift?
Sure, but no free rides. You'll have to pull the lever sometimes.
I can do that.
Let's go then.
I like the vibes here. I assume it wasn't intentional at all, but this always gave me the feeling of like a Wild West convoy. With how dangerous travel is out in the wild, people are quick to form into makeshift groups just to safely move from station to station. I love that. It's a neat world building device. Because I should clarify, just because 2 stations are right next to each other and they're under the same allied faction, those tunnels are complete no man's land. All sorts of shit can creep in through cracks and burrows along the track. Not to mention all of the other various phenomena that can be encountered if one isn't too careful. It's why stations try and set up defense checkpoints far out into the tunnel. We have no clue what's lurking out there. All we know is we don't want it straying too close to the station.
Slow down, guys.
Peter, what's up?
A military caravan got stuck near Alexeyevskaya. A tunnel collapsed or other shit. You have to use the service tunnel bypassing Alexeyevskaya.
Fuck, I hate this tunnel. All right, Peter, open up the gate. No point being stuck here forever.
Why? Well, what's wrong with that tunnel?
Well, it's an ordinary tunnel. Not as well lit, maybe. I went through that last month and, well, I just don't like it, that's all.
I love the little touch here. Superstitions run wild here, and it's just accepted that some tunnels should be avoided for unknown reasons. This one being a pretty good example.
Artyom! What is it?
Artyom! Over here!
If we are to survive, this threat must be eliminated, no matter the cost. Eliminate it.
Yeah, this is why you don't go down certain tunnels. Oh yeah, QuickTime events. It is what it is. Metro definitely was a product of its time. You can tell that 4A really wanted their game to be treated as another proper big budget cinematic shooter, which is why there's so many of these kinds of set pieces. It's a decent little chase. I like the touch that the guy who tagged along is the only one who got dragged off. Luckily, we get saved at Riga, and we share a drink with our boys, who are just happy to still be alive. That's kind of the attitude here. You're happy to survive from making just one leg of the journey. For us, this is just the first stop to Polis, and we already nearly died and had an out-of-body experience to go along with it. This is Riga Station. Already you can tell that things are a little more calm here than back home. The real station Riga is based on was built during the same period as Artyom Station. That is to say, it was in the era of Khrushchev's cost-cutting mass-produced station designs. In real life, the main difference is that it lacks any of the chandeliers that Exhibition has. It also has these bright yellow and reddish-brown ceramic tiles. I've read a post that the locals nicknamed the station Fried Eggs and Bacon. In 2033's harsh lighting, it's hard to make out much color at all, but if you pay close attention to these pylons, you can see those yellow tiles slowly chipping away. It's a nice detail that you don't notice until you're making comparison shots such as these. Artyom can't stay at Riga forever. We meet a suspicious man named Bourbon, who promises to help get us to a nearby station, Dry Station, which will have us going through Market Station on the way there, which is currently controlled by Hansa. Riga is currently on lockdown, so there's no official way to get from Riga to Market. Bourbon has another route. He's going to take us through the nearby maintenance tunnels. The journey through these tunnels is a good reminder for why you shouldn't stray too far from the off-traveled routes. They are filled with mutants and bandits. This is our intro to human combat as well as stealth, and it's pretty rough in this area. Keep in mind, Metro predates the whole backstab an enemy silently mechanic that you see in a lot of modern stealth sections. All you have in this game are throwing knives. Try not to miss, because now every bastard with a shotgun knows your exact location. Having played through the game many times, I kind of forget how even the starting enemies are quick to kill you if you aren't too careful. That's the funny thing about Metro. As the stakes ramp up and as you start encountering more and more horrors, you start feeling progressively more relieved at the previous set of enemies. Oh, thank God it's bandits. At least it's not Nazis. Oh, thank God it's Nazis. At least it's not mutants. Oh, thank God it's mutants. Not an incomprehensible collective hive mind trying to pull my brain into hell. I do enjoy the atmosphere of some of these areas. These aren't just regular subway tunnels. It opens up into large underground bridges and raised tracks above pits of toxic air, crossing through a labyrinth of old stonework catacombs just to make it to Market Station, which even then forces us to fend off waves of mutants until they let us in. These are also some good examples of how the underground tunnels aren't quite as cramped and straightforward as you might expect. They're actually quite expansive, mainly because we're finally at the ring line, which is a crossroads for many different lines that all intersect. It explains why the infrastructure here is a lot more developed. Well, we're officially out of Allied territory, and now we're in a Hansa-controlled marketplace. The guards definitely seem a little more suspicious. They're haggling Bourbon for money that he clearly owes them. They are neutral to us though, so we hopefully don't have to worry about them too much. This is Market Station. In real life it's called Prospect Mira. The station's pretty closed off. You can see that Hansa really overhauled its layout with new walls and buildings. The devs did add some great little touches. These pylons here are pulled directly from the station in real life. I know it's a minor thing to point out, but little details like this go a long way to sell just how faithful the art team is with real life locations. This is more than just a bustling marketplace. Market is much better equipped than Exhibition or Riga. They have access to more equipment, better equipped soldiers. Hansa is the wealthiest of the factions down here, so it makes sense. And man, it is a bustling marketplace too. All merchants have to go through here, so these vendors are exchanging goods from all across the metro. We can't stay here too long, sadly. Bourbon has too many debts, so we gotta quick get out of Dodge. Our next destination is Dry Station, which we don't know too much about. It's further past the ring down the same line. We don't even know who controls the station at this point, so we're just kind of trusting that Bourbon has our best interests. It's also clear that Bourbon doesn't want us going down the main tunnels, so we're taking a side route to Dry Station instead. We're going up on the surface. Up until this point in the game, our only experience of the surface has been the prologue section, which itself is set within a forested park inside Moscow. This is our first glimpse at the city proper, and man, what an impression. And we understand immediately why the underground is far more preferable than living up here. Roads have split open like narrow canyons. Flooded ravines create a maze of toxic rivers and shorelines made of ice. Buildings are in constant decay, falling apart, scarred with holes and collapsed rooftops. Overhead, we can see giant demons circling, looking for their next meal. It's a complete and hopeless hellscape full of nightmares, and it is amazing. The art direction does a good job in selling just how futile it is to even survive up here. Once again, invoking those great visuals from classic science fiction films. But I also find these levels invoke a bit of the Strugatsky brothers. Not just Stalker, but especially the Doomed City. It's a sense of urban exploration through the ruins of a once mighty city, now crumbling in the middle of an inhospitable wasteland. It's some great stuff, visually and mechanically. Getting slowly hunted by watchers, exploring for supplies, going through creepy hallucinations. Some of these aren't hallucinations though, are they? Yeah, this place sucks. Let's get back downstairs. Turns out Dry Station is full of bandits. Our idiot guide Bourbon gets captured, while our team is left to figure out what to do. This is our first real stealth mission, so it's really just a test of patience, making sure you can sneak by patrols, and very rarely using that throwing knife to kill the one stray enemy that's in your path. It's pretty simple so long as you hug this side platform right here. It is a little frustrating because you're going to have to squeeze yourself between these boxes and these awkwardly designed angled geometric pylons. And thanks to the game's weird handling of platforming and friction, it's easy to get stuck here. I would complain about this design, but once again, I have to hand it to the environment artists. This is exactly what this station in real life looks like. Those annoying ass pylons were copied 1-to-1. Dry Station is right off the Red Line, and fans speculate that these bandits are some sort of group of Red Line deserters. It makes sense. We'll see in a bit how the Reds have a bit of a desertion problem. If a player sneaks through enemies without picking a fight, they might notice a few guards getting picked off silently from some unseen shooter. Someone is helping us along. I just can't see them yet. Eventually we manage to get to Bourbon, who's being interrogated, and he quickly uses me as a distraction. Bourbon tries to fight back, and it's not too effective. Yeah, good night. In the novel, it's actually implied that Bourbon was stringing Artyom along to eventually kill and rob him anyway. Plus, he did literally lead us through a fucking station filled to the brim with bandits, so I don't know how sorry I feel for him. But this is where we get introduced to a surprisingly important character for the games, Khan. He's been quietly helping us along throughout the level, so he seems pretty trustworthy. He seems a little strange, but at least he doesn't give me the "I'm going to shiv you when you aren't looking" vibes that Bourbon did. So yeah, I'll stick with Khan. It's not like there's anywhere else I can go. With Khan as our new guide, our team still has a long way to get to Polis. It's with Khan that a lot of the game's concepts and themes get introduced. You quickly realize that Khan is no ordinary wanderer, and he's something of a spiritualist. He speaks with reverence towards the dead, and he shows Artyom that there's more to the world than just physical reality. He's who we're with when we encounter shadows of lost souls, seemingly stuck permanently where they died. It seems that these beings, or remnants, whatever you might call them, are perpetually stuck in their final moments. Guards still at their post, or a child running from a mutant. But these aren't the first ghosts we've encountered. It's easy to miss during the vision sequence at the start of the game, but if you look closely during the trolley sequence, you can see multiple ghosts walking by the cart. It's not explained in the game, but the trolley actually goes through the ghost of a Dark One. That's how Artyom gets the vision of a Dark One's final moments before getting shot by Hunter. I don't want to be discussing the end of the game this early on, but I was always curious if the game is trying to imply that it's this moment right here that gives Artyom some sort of ability to understand these Dark One visions without fully going crazy. We'll talk more about that later. It's a neat visual. I wish the game had thrown these ghosts at us when we were completely on our own. Like, if we ran into shadows like these a few times just entirely by ourselves, this would be a pretty effective horror sequence. Khan also shows us our first anomaly, an electric one. And it sets up the overarching theme of 2033, that all these strange phenomena, while dangerous, are not inherently evil.
Wicked phenomenon, yes. But, you know, it's not any more evil than, say, fire. It all depends on your point of view. Try to get a better understanding of things before you make your judgment.
His character is expanded a lot in the video game series, which is definitely an improvement over the novel. In the book, he was a one-off side character used for a single chapter. I like his characterization here. He's a memorable character for a reason. He doesn't exude any of the bravado or crassness that we see in a lot of other Metro characters. Khan is quiet and soft-spoken, gently observing and sharing his own philosophical view for Artyom to think upon. He might behave a little weirdly, but you always seem to trust him. I never considered Khan to be morally gray. He always seemed pretty altruistic. He's the type of person who's looking at the big picture. Khan seems to have a sort of accepting view of the world. He recognizes its tragedies, but to him, it's almost just a part of nature. He accepts it and moves on with himself, never loitering too long around a cause, which explains why he acts sort of like a nomad. He's not opposed to violence outright, far from it. He's willing to fight if he believes doing so will help the greater good. But as for what exactly that means, only he knows for certain. After our run-ins with ghosts and supernatural entities, we find ourselves helping out a poor station in the middle of a mutant takeover. It's bad too. They've managed to breach onto the actual platform itself, and all the residents are held up near one of the exits. It's an area where I think the level designers matched closest to the station in real life, since there's barely any debris or shacks built along the platform. It's a tense level because, of course, Artyom is chosen to go off on his own, no backup at all, and the player has to run through endless waves of no solaces. You can explore here if you want, just know that the enemies will keep coming after you if you take your sweet time. Go upstairs and seal one of the pressure doors in this smoke-filled room. After that, you have to hunt down a bomb, move it to one of the tunnels, try not to get jump scared like I did, and then blow the tunnel to smithereens. Job well done. And Khan gives us a farewell, guiding us to go to Armory Station by ourselves and to meet up with an associate of his, Andrew the blacksmith. With that, we're alone again. Armory Station is immediately off-putting. The guards welcome us in, but they quickly warn us that this station is under the quote-unquote protection of the Red Line. So far, we've seen a few different stations under a couple different factions. The Commonwealth Station, as well as the Hansa Station, were both pretty friendly enough. Shanty towns with people chatting around every corner, kids running around, bars. Market Station was packed to the brim full of vendors and shoppers. Armory is where we can immediately tell that something is wrong, since the paths are empty and no one can be seen. Welcome to the Red Line, a nightmarish Stalinist dystopia full of all the torture and political prosecution that these post-apocalyptic commies would ever want. All it takes is stumbling through the wrong door and suddenly you and some random other prisoner are running through the station as red guards fire at you wildly. This random guy gets killed and you have no escape until a mysterious person pulls you into their hut to hide you. This is Andrew the blacksmith. Pretty good coincidence for a guy who I don't think knows that I'm coming. Artyom quickly dons a disguise, and Andrew helps us come up with a plan to get to Polis. It's by this point that we should probably consult a map again, because those not paying much attention might be completely lost here. Artyom has branched off the line that Exhibition Station and Riga are on, and he is now past the Ring Line. Here's Armory Station, just off from the Red Line. Following the Red Line is actually the most direct route to Polis, just a few hops away, but this entire line is closed off thanks to this little pesky faction we haven't met yet, the Fourth Reich. As one might imagine, they and the Red Line are locked in an endless conflict. So, Red Line stations and routes right alongside Nazi territory are under constant attack. Currently, there's a major front line occurring right here, so all rail traffic from both sides is being tunneled into this area. Instead of having Artyom sneak his way through Red Line stations undetected, Andrew suggests that Artyom should try going the easy way, into the front line, ferried by a Red Line transport trolley, and then sneak away from the battle. This is where I don't really understand what the plan is from here. I guess the idea is that Artyom will find some weird side maintenance tunnel and hopefully find his way to Polis, but I'm not really sure where Artyom's expected to go. Did he think Artyom might have an easier time sneaking through Nazi territory than Red territory? Or was he hoping that Artyom would just naturally find himself up on the surface? The game doesn't address this at all, which is a bit of a weird oversight, considering that Andrew's decision here to send Artyom into the front line creates this entire long detour from here on out, despite the fact that we were this close to Polis. So Artyom is stuffed underneath a carriage and is ferried off to the front lines. Front Lines is a great level, just for concepts alone. An active choke point between two violent, war-hungry factions who are just throwing bodies at the meat grinder. You have the opportunity to sneak through an active war zone, quietly moving through the Reds, then past the Nazis. All the while, both sides are shooting at each other. It's a mission whose design encourages exploration too, and it's probably one of the most explorable areas in the whole game. There are so many wonderful little side passages and hidden areas to either grab new weapons or gear. You have all these walkways below the main track too. Lots of little side stories, soldiers having small talk. There's little areas where you can pick off a handful of soldiers at a time, but you have to be careful so you don't draw any attention from the battalion of men right above you. If you equip a gas mask, you can actually navigate all the way down to this pit, which leads to a completely optional side area. You can use night vision goggles to spot for tripwires and traps, and then you essentially have your route planned out all the way back up. It's an incredibly satisfying level to sneak through, and all of these stealth mechanics really come into their own here. That is, until Artyom gets ambushed himself. Yeah, it pulls a Half-Life. A pair of Nazis capture Artyom. I don't really know what Artyom's plan was either. Just waltz behind Nazi lines and hope he has an easier time blending in than he did in a communist station. It's a good thing Artyom has luck on his side, because these particular Nazis love to monologue, and they do so long enough for a pair of rangers to sneak up on them. Enter Pavel and Ullman. Hunter is the only other ranger we've encountered by this point, so seeing a pair of them is a welcome sight. Seemingly the only faction in the whole of the Metro that seems not only reasonable and good-willed, but also has the strength to stop those who are maybe less persuaded. Already they're much better equipped than we are, and they're literally wandering around Nazi territory without alerting anybody. Something which we're apparently terrible at.
You owe me one, kid. You don't look like a rat. Who the hell are you? That's Hunter's token. I'd better take you to Miller. Whatever message you have, save it for him.
With only 2 seats in their trolley, Pavel opts to bring Artyom along, while Ullman plans on meeting back up with us later on foot. Artyom and Pavel set out through Nazi lines, hoping to go unnoticed. I should remind you that from this point up until Polis, this part of the game is a pretty big divergence from the novel. In the book, Hunter is the only ranger Artyom ever meets up until he gets to Polis. And at this point in the story, he's traveling mostly by himself, getting into entire chapters worth of misadventures. There's a point in the book where he and another man essentially become indentured servants thanks to them losing a bet on a rat race. Another fun fact, this is where the idea of a multiplayer rat race game mode came from, thanks to this chapter in the book, which honestly would have been a pretty hilarious game mode. But this part of the novel doesn't really have Artyom sneaking through Red Line or Nazi stations. He's just kind of by himself, meeting weird faces and new groups of people. There's a part of the book where he spends time at a religious monastery, and Glukovsky spends some time writing about the meaning of belief. No, in the game, it's mostly one unending action sequence. Yeah, I can see how the game is tonally different to the book. Trolley combat is pretty intense. You and Pavel have a very short-lived plan of trying to drive through Nazi territory and blend in, but Pavel gets called out instantly by some random Nazi commander, and now you two are trying to drive through the tunnels as entire Nazi battalions are shooting at you. The turret has a very slow turning speed, so it's mostly a test on memorization, remembering where enemies are going to be spawning from. It's a very lengthy sequence too. 4A were very obviously pulling inspiration from some of the cinematic military shooters that were out at the time. This is literally a section on rails. If I'm being honest, there are quite a few areas in Metro that feel like 4A experimenting and seeing if they can pull off common Western AAA video game tropes. And for what it's worth, it is a neat section, at least in terms of world building. We're in a world where control of the underground rail lines is all that matters. So in terms of mechanized warfare, all vehicles are built around rail movement. Armored trolleys and makeshift tanks built to run on rails. We get a brief glimpse at full-scale Metro warfare. Well, our journey with Pavel doesn't last too long. We're forced deeper into the Metro lines as we're forced to swap vehicles, where we then get swarmed by more Nazis and now mutants. Pavel gets yoinked off the cart, and now it's just Artyom stuck on this nightmare roller coaster ride, crashing him right into a convenient side story. Here we get what's an interesting pair of levels. You run up to a badly defended whole station, which is being relentlessly besieged by mutants, similar to the cursed station from earlier. Well, the defenders gladly accept your help, and so you get a little wave defense section. This doesn't last long. Yeah, see? After we wake up, the entire station has been overrun. One of the defenders, in his dying breath, gives Artyom a recording, a message, a warning to all the other stations about the mutant breach. One last act to potentially save the rest of the metro. With that, you slowly enter the station. It's in complete ruins. Bodies are strewn everywhere. Gear and supplies knocked over. This place was abandoned in a rush. You can explore and search for ammo and gear, but keep in mind that you aren't alone here. Throughout the station, you'll see holes carved out through dirt and concrete, and if you loiter around for too long, you may start getting swarmed by these ankle biters. Lurkers are hunting you, and all you can do is push through their nests and progress through the station as fast as you can. You do eventually run into a child, Sasha, mourning over the body of his uncle. Artyom shows a bit of his character and offers to help him regroup with the survivors. With Sasha climbing up on Artyom's shoulders, you continue through the maintenance tunnels around the station. The journey becomes a lot more difficult, since with the extra weight of the kid, Artyom can no longer sprint. His aim also becomes a lot more sluggish, and it's a lot harder to aim your gun. Sasha will call out lurkers as they spawn, although you really can't defend in this section. As far as I can tell, lurkers will continuously spawn if you loiter in an area for too long. It really is a trial of endurance for you to push through, avoiding lurker spawns and getting to the end as fast as you can. While the dialogue can feel a bit ropey, I did find Sasha's comments to be a little charming. He's just a kid, and he doesn't have much of an understanding of the world.
Mom says if the kids go too far into the tunnels, the mutants catch them and eat their brains. And then those kids become mutants and go chasing other kids. Is that true?
One particular moment is where you briefly walk under an exposed air duct. And when he sees the skylight coming in from above, he comments on how he's never seen the sky before.
Wow, what's that up there? Wait, Uncle showed me a picture once. The sky. That's the sky, isn't it? It's like a painted ceiling. I'll be famous. I sold the sky.
With him safely returned to his mother, the player, Artyom, is allowed to accept her gift of bullets, or to let her keep them. I love this as a mechanic. Make the game easier by being selfish, or be charitable and let her keep those extra bullets. I like the player having that choice. Well, things are still pretty dire here, but everyone seems to be in better spirits. The soldiers there seem relieved that you managed to return the boy, and it's a moment of triumph for Artyom, where you really feel like the hero. I still don't get any discounts on my guns though, I noticed that. The remaining survivors allow Artyom to pass through, and they open the airlock for him, leading players back onto the surface. Outpost is a change of pace, and it comes at the perfect moment where I think a lot of players were feeling burnt out with Defense and Child. This is definitely a make or break moment in the game. And luckily, Outpost might be one of the game's best levels. We have left the confines of the metro tunnels, and we are now breathing the fresh, cold winter air, with our goal to get through an outpost full of Nazis. It's a great environment to stretch your legs, and the layout is surprisingly intuitive. For the most part, you have a handful of little areas where you can engage in stealth or go guns blazing. And they're all kind of separated from each other. Leaving the station, you can sneak behind an approaching party of soldiers who are attempting to blow open the airlock that you just went through, presumably to get into the now poorly defended station. It's kind of ominous, and the player can just let them go. But at the same time, you know in the back of your head that if those Nazis break through, the defenders don't stand a chance. You can climb up bits of scaffolding, find these two soldiers by themselves in a shack, probably just drinking vodka all day for being real, and then you slowly start to approach this large building. It's full of roving patrols of guards through different levels and in different rooms. Stealth is always very tricky here, because you can't rely on the darkness. It's pretty bright out right now, so if any Nazi glances our way, we're instantly spotted. Once you get past this building, you go through the ruins of a large busy road, where an additional patrol of soldiers are emerging from the Black Station. That's your goal. There's just a lot of stuff to do here. If you want to wipe out the entire outpost, you can do it. If you want to stop those guys from breaking through the airlock and destroying the survivors, you can do that too. Additionally, remember that message that you got earlier? Well, if you manage to get to the top of the building, making sure to avoid the constant patrols of these demons, you can connect to a radio tower and get that transmission played across the entire metro. Just a fun, out-of-the-way side objective. I think a lot of players probably miss this area. An environment designer for this level actually wrote a pretty interesting post about how this whole area was designed and a lot of the struggles they faced in making it. I thought it was interesting hearing about the challenges in designing an outdoor level to flush the player forward, while also trying to make sure they never got lost or stuck out of bounds. This is where the idea of adding fissures and cracks in the earth came from, making it look like the remnants of an earthquake. It's really just done to prevent the player from getting out of bounds. Additionally, in this part of the level, the reason there's cars here is to give good cover to the player once they engage in a gunfight. The designers were trying to come up with what would look natural here, and the burnt out husks of cars was just a good choice. It helped with gameplay, and it looked good artistically. The lighting was also chosen to be more of an evenly lit overcast, because when they experimented with doing something a little darker and closer to sunset, it created a ton of shadow glitching on the edges of the map, so they had to keep the lighting slightly brighter to fix that. Some fun little details that you never really think about that go into a level. But the hits don't stop coming, because the level right after, Black Station, might be my personal favorite section in the entire series. We meet back up with Ullman.
What took you so long? Where's Babel? Did he... Alright, later. The situation got worse. Nazis literally flooded the station. You'll have to act alone. Sorry.
To help us get through the station, he offers us a silenced VSV. Assuming we hadn't bought one already. It'll be helpful in the next part of the game. Now, the chances of us running into Ullman is very lucky, considering we're talking about miles and miles of underground tunnel networks. Keep in mind, we have traveled incredibly far from the place that we left Ullman at. I was also going to say that I don't think Ullman could have made it to Black Station at the same time as Artyom, because once again, keep in mind, he's hoofing it on foot. Artyom and Pavel, we were on motorized transport for a while. But again, if we consult the map, we can kind of get a better idea of what's happening. First off, Pavel drove us the complete wrong way. I have no clue where he was taking us. To be honest, we probably would have been better off hoofing it like Ullman did. Either way, we went all the way down here to the south side of the ring line, getting to Hull Station, and now coming back up and crossing over to Black Station. This is what we have to go through if we want to go to Polis. Meanwhile, Ullman, who we left behind somewhere around here, all he had to do was hop over to Polis from Nazi territory, then head back down to Black Station to meet back up with us. He probably swung by Polis to pick up a new trolley for us. Well, Black Station is under Nazi occupation, so we gotta sneak through it if we want to link up with Ullman. And it's a great level. The way the environment loops around creates this seamless flow of movement, letting you navigate around the station, picking off lone groups of enemies until no one is left. It's a very satisfying level to completely stealth through. The station really lives up to its name too, as you can snipe all the light sources and plunge the entire area into darkness. It's also the one level in the game where the player has access to all of their stealth tools. VSVs, silenced pneumatic weapons, NVGs, darkness to hide your approach, traps to avoid, various patrols of enemies that can be silently picked off. It's a mission that tests your stealth abilities, and by the end of it, you really feel like Ranger material. It's also the last level with human enemies to fight, because here on out, we're done dealing with the Reich or the Red Line. We're headed to the big city of Polis. It's a good send-off, just to show Artyom's growth as a warrior. Going from a young, frightful man who was too scared to even take on bandits, into a full-blown soldier who was able to wipe out entire squads full of Reds and Nazis, but still maintaining a strong conscience. Many people harp on Artyom being a silent protagonist. They say that he's not really a character. This is why I tend to disagree. Artyom has a lot of characterization. You can see it if you actually pay closer attention. By the time Artyom makes it to Polis, he's practically a ranger. At Polis, we get to see the fabled city of the Metro. It's an interchange hub of 4 different stations across 4 different lines. It's right in the center of the city, and as such, it's the center of wealth and power down in the underground. Much of Polis is fictional, especially in its design. There was never a massive underground hub where all 4 stations connected. But its appearance here has been exaggerated just to hit home the idea of how powerful Polis is as a faction. One of the environment designers for Metro, Dmytro Zenin, explained his approach to designing Polis on his professional portfolio website. I actually referenced this earlier when I was talking about the level Outpost. He helped design that as well. The design for this area was meant to exude wealth and power, so many creative liberties were taken. Apparently, this giant glass archway was directly inspired by Moscow Kievskaya railway station, which Dmytro saw many times as a kid. The only station we really get to see the inside of is Arbitskaya, which is identifiable by its classical architecture. It has ornamental wall carvings and bright, big chandeliers. However, this multi-level part is exaggerated too, best I can tell. The central hallway is not 2 stories in real life, but the designers wanted to show that the people of Polis quite literally saw themselves above everyone else. This illustrates that. Also, apparently the developers wanted to play around with flooded tunnels and boat sections. And this might have been a brief little teaser for later games. Again, there's all these fun little details that go into designing an environment. You don't really consider any of this. Dmytro Zenin has some great insights on his portfolio, which I'll definitely link to. I do have to clarify, it's roughly translated, so it's a little hard to read. But it's still interesting stuff. He's still working at 4A to this day, and he's still designing environments for Metro. Well, it's this part in the game we finally get to meet Colonel Miller, head of the Rangers. He's impressed by how resilient Artyom was in getting to Polis, just to pass on Hunter's message. So he helps pass Artyom's request for aid along to the Polis Council. As one can obviously guess, Polis is of no help. The council decides that Artyom's home, Exhibition Station, is too much of a liability to risk sending troops or equipment to help defend. In fairness, we're talking about Polis sending people and supplies to a tiny station on the other side of the metro, through multiple hot zones currently fighting amongst each other. For a city focused on protecting itself, this isn't much of a surprise. Miller is pissed that Polis won't help. So, going off his own accord, the Rangers have a different idea than Hunter did. Instead of simply sending reinforcements, they're going to try and wipe out the Dark Ones for good, with or without Polis. You see, at this point in the lore, the Rangers have recently stumbled across several pre-war military silos and missile launchers, with some of them seeming to be intact, but they can't be activated on the ground. They're remote controlled from a command center, and Miller has a hunch to where it's located. Earlier in the game, we get the hint of the fabled D6, a second hidden metro line far deeper than the regular metro stations that could have theoretically housed top Russian leadership.
Those living here forgot about Metro 2, and it became a thing of myth. But though we are no longer aware of Metro 2, it does exist. It is all around us. Its tunnels entwined with our own, its stations behind the walls of our stations. The 2 metros are inseparable. And those who believe that the shepherds could not abandon their herd say that they watch over us still, directing our every step.
Miller also seems pretty confident that it exists, which is probably thanks to the fact that he was a special forces operative before the war. So he certainly knows that it's real, just he has no idea how to access it. If the command center for D6 is still operational, then they can use those remaining missiles to launch a strike on the Dark Ones, destroying their nest and saving Artyom's home. It's all reliant on the fact that we can find D6 and that it's still operational. Although, if there's any place that contains documentation on D6, it would have to be the Great Library. The Russian State Library. It's a brisk walk from the entrance of Polis, even if the Watchers seem to be particularly needy today. Artyom, Miller, and a ranger, Danila, reconvene outside the entrance to this massive building. A giant plaza stretches before the player. Giant pillars hold up a stunning structure, withering away but no less striking. However, we don't have time to bask in its construction as a particularly nosy demon gives chase, forcing us to retreat further inside. Welcome to the library. The Russian State Library, to be exact. Much like the metro that spans below, this too can trace its origins back to the days of the Empire. Under the Soviet Union, the library was partially rebuilt, including its iconic neoclassical main entryway. The environment here is very striking. Something about a beautiful, lavish library left in decay and rot. It's a very memorable image. Snow and ice is sneaking through the windows. Bizarre vegetation hangs from the ceilings. The entire building is slowly crumbling from the constant barrage of the elements. Yet people still venture in here. Books and knowledge are so precious in the apocalypse that many risk their lives to journey into here. It's a wealth of pre-war knowledge. And this isn't just a place for regular novels, though they do exist in abundance here.
And Bistro Gatsky. Roadside picnic. Huh, something familiar.
Rather, deeper inside the library, there are archives and vaults full of highly classified government secrets that would be a boon to any faction that possessed them. Polis regularly sends stalkers up into the library to retrieve books and documents. You can immediately tell by the various bodies that litter the hallway. Polis is desperate to leverage their position beneath the library as a bargaining chip in the metro, so people regularly risk the journey up inside. But it's not an easy feat. To get into the archives, you have to venture deep inside, and any unsuspecting interloper quickly finds that there are other dangers lurking in the library other than vines or watchers. There are a ton of dead bodies. Some of these belong to Reich explorers. Perhaps they were trying to make a go at the library themselves while no one was looking. All of them suffering a similar fate. It's clear already that we shouldn't overstay our welcome. Keep an eye out as you move deeper into the library. You may catch glimpses of something. The same demon from earlier breaks through the window, and Danila is heavily injured. Miller has no choice but to take him back to Polis, leaving Artyom once again on his own. Miller does give him a word of advice, though. We are not alone in the library. The inhabitants of this building, the librarians, are what lurk deep in the archives, and you can't hope to fight them. You need to hold your ground, stare them in the eye, and don't ever turn your back on them.
Librarians are some of the most dangerous creatures out here. If you meet one, or two, God forbid, don't fight it. But don't run from it either. The beast won't attack you if you look them in the eye. Now remember, never let them out of your sight. Show them your back, you die.
With Artyom left to venture in alone, we finally get to the most infamous section of Metro 2033. You spot librarians immediately when entering the archive room. It's hard to gauge just how many of them are lurking in here. You see a few of them lounging around, jumping from floor to floor through cracks in the ceiling. A player who doesn't heed Miller's warning might immediately open fire, in which case you're in for the fight of your life. This is literally a section that is impossible on Ranger mode if you don't play it carefully. You need to stop, hold your ground, and look directly at a librarian when they challenge you. They'll growl. They might even try to close the gap, maybe charge or swipe, but you have to keep facing them no matter what. If you glance away even for a split second, they'll become hostile and waste no time ripping you apart. You need to eye them down for as long as it takes, and eventually, if you're persistent enough, they'll lose interest. When you first encounter these guys, you have no friggin' clue if the stare down will even work. There's almost a thought in the back of your head that this is all BS, and Miller's advice won't even apply here. But if you're resilient enough, you'll find that it works, and that you can calm these guys down by holding your ground and not turning your back. Of course, some individuals will make rushes for you when you aren't looking, and if you loiter in a room for too long, they'll regain an interest in you. You'll find the librarians testing you around every corner. The design for them is strange. It's really hard to gauge what exactly they are. They aren't quite human looking. They're certainly humanoid, but their features seem off. It's theorized that they might be mutations derived from apes, possibly those kept at the Moscow Zoo that have escaped and evolved on their own. Whatever the case, they are big and aggressive and are hard as nails unless you do exactly as Miller says. This is another slight deviation between the book and the game. The book depicted the intelligence of a librarian very differently. Now, the librarians in the novel are described as looking pretty close to how they look in-game. The same giant humanoid furry creatures who bear a very striking resemblance to existing hominids. However, they have an ominous, undetermined level of intelligence in the book. They're able to mimic speech perfectly. There's a particular moment in the book where a librarian is standing over the body of a dying stalker, and he's able to mimic the guy's words perfectly, to the point where Artyom isn't sure if it's the librarian speaking or the stalker speaking, both at the same time. It was never explained how intelligent they really were, if they are simply animals who mimic speech to hunt their prey, or if they legitimately have a base level understanding of language. Either way, they are a very terrifying monster, and in a world already filled to the brim with scary shit, the librarians managed to make quite the impression. At first, you think you've made it past them, until you get plunged deeper into the lower levels. Down in the dark basement of the library, it's clear that these guys are a little different. They seem more aggressive, less willing to retreat. They'll feign losing interest only to take a quick swipe at you. Things get even worse the further in you go. Eventually, you will find yourself within the maintenance corridors, in rooms filled with glowing green fungi, and a sleeping den of librarians. Keep an eye on the floor. Try your best not to step on the loud crunching bones of their last meal if you don't want to wake them. or you can do what I did and just exploit the flawed AI if you have enough ammo. The library remains one of the most memorable levels in the entire series. Up until this point, the rare times you had to run from mutants, it was usually scripted. In addition, human levels were the ones with stealth, and these levels made you feel like a sneaky commando, wiping out entire squads in the dark. It's the level of the library where you realize that these things are stronger and scarier than you are. You are no longer at the top of the food chain here, and the game will test you around every corner, with a memorable enemy which still has players discussing pathways and exploits to this day because of how tense this mission is. But once you get through it, you'll finally reach the archive room, which leads you to the last part of the game, the hunt for D6. With our documents in hand, Artyom is ambushed by a final librarian before the poor sucker becomes Russian roadkill, and we find ourselves reconvening at the first ranger base on the surface, Sparta base, a dimly lit church. Now's a good time to keep track of some of the not-so-subtle biblical allegories we'll see throughout this series, which becomes pretty prominent in this game the closer you look. I mean, here we literally are, man attempting to retake the world, huddled up inside a church as demons circle above. All we need now is a Tower of Babel analogy. Oh my god. Metro as a series is interesting in that it really pulls together many thematic allusions to spiritualism. The book even has its own chapter dedicated to discussing religion. These are concepts that in most sci-fi post-apocalyptic fiction, they're treated more like background lore, or left exclusively to side characters or creepy religious cults, which Metro has as well. But what makes this series unique is that these elements are at the forefront of characters and their actions. It's an interesting addition to the story. So far, I've loved the depiction of every station and outpost for each faction, all nicely representing what they're about. Exhibition is small, quaint, everyone knows each other, people are more friendly, kids out playing and listening to stories. Innocent and naive. That's what you get from Artyom and his home. Armory Station is an unnerving town full of distrust and repression, with redline soldiers performing searches, arresting people. You won't spot any kids playing outside their homes here. The various Nazi stations and outposts are barren, filled with traps, surrounded by mutants constantly picking away at their forces. Electric generators that are ultimately failing plunge them into darkness, an attempt at civilizing the wasteland which is ultimately ending in failure. Polis is a crowded, bright, gleaming city full of energy and color, but ultimately closed off to Artyom and his plight, that wealth of knowledge hoarded behind closed doors. And here we finally get to see Sparta base. It's tiny, very small, very few people, showing how small of a faction the Spartan Order really is. Yet it's incredibly well equipped, and we're in a beautiful church too, adding a sense of divine righteousness to our mission. We're not just a faction trying to survive, we're crusaders on a mission. These are really nice artistic touches to quickly inform a player about a faction and what they're about. It's good design. Some games could learn from it. I love the little detail that they're using scavenged motorcycle wheels as chandeliers. Such a cool little touch. Khan can be spotted in this mission. It's a bit of a mystery how he even got here. He tends to hang around the Rangers like a stray cat, and he disappears as quickly as he arrives. He's mostly there to chastise us about our mission and to warn us about what we're possibly about to do.
You reap what you sow, Artyom. Force answers force. War breeds war, and death only brings death. To break this vicious circle, one must do more than just act without any thought or doubt.
But the Rangers completely ignore him. We have our goal, get to D6. And this leads to probably one of the more controversial sections in Metro 2033. It's quite the deviation from the book as well. In the novel, after the library, Artyom and Miller completely split off, with Artyom essentially going on a completely unrelated side quest. He ends up at a Hansa station, he helps a man search for a missing child, and he stumbles upon a part of the Metro that's controlled by a cannibal religious cult who believe in the Great Worm, a deity they believe is responsible for carving out the tunnels of the Metro. The Worm Cult is actually referenced in the original unused design document, implying that perhaps this part of the game might have played a little closer to the novel. It's after getting captured by this cult that Artyom is rescued by Rangers, who then bring him along with their journey into Metro 2 and onward to D6. The extent of Metro 2 is much larger in the book as well. The book basically implies that Metro 2 is a city-spanning metro system, not just a singular base. To get to D6, the group essentially have to travel on this completely never-before-seen metro line. In-game, this is reduced to a single access door, which then leads us through some caves and tunnels. And the game's pretty much doing its own thing, depicting D6 as a multi-stage arena. First, you need to vent out the toxic air. Then you need to fight these weird, globby amoeba things, which I think might be the worst enemy in any Metro game. They spawn in endlessly, and their only form of attack is to kamikaze dive bomb at you. And you may be thinking, well, just run past them. Yeah, the issue here is you have to escort Miller through this fucking minefield. Miller, who walks like a geriatric old man, and who can also die to these things, by the way. So you can't just sprint past them. You need to waste your ammo firing at them. And then you have to deal with a biomass, this stationary fleshy protrusion on top of the D6 reactor core, which forces you to engage in a crane minigame ripped straight out of Doom 3. It's the weakest part of the game. I feel like had a bit of tweaking been done, this could have been a really fun level, because already we're expanding upon D6, which was completely glossed over in the book. When the characters get to D6 in the novel, it's already perfectly functional. Artyom barely has a chance to get settled in before he's already heading to the tower. Also in the book, he's paired up with Ullman, not Miller. Now the biomass is in the novel, but it's not found at a reactor beneath the command center. In the book, it's this gelatinous blob that's flowing around the remains of the Kremlin's secret metro system. The game doesn't really explain what the hell this thing even is, because the characters theorize that it's actually a bioweapon that's gone out of control and has somehow gained sentience. I'm not really sure about that part. It hypnotically calls out to its victims so that they can be absorbed, which might explain why Metro 2 is completely devoid of all life. There should have been an entire base full of military leaders down here. Yet, presumably, this is what became of them. And yeah, the book depicts it as this mobile creature sloshing around the station, actively seeking out prey and hunting them down. It's a real terrifying part of the book, and I wonder how this section would have played out if the devs had tried to capture on that. Instead of these silly amoeba things, what if the biomass actively hunted the player, forcing the player to run to cover or use explosives and distractions to buy more time? Instead of dozens of annoying little enemies, give us one really good boss that the player has to use stealth and explosives to counter. Just an idea. I do like the idea of D6 being completely closed off to the rest of the world. This is an ecosystem with mutants and creatures that have been isolated for decades. I like the idea that not even the regular outside wildlife have managed to get into D6. But that doesn't mean the level is good at all. There's also a weird issue with the level, which I have not seen a single soul mention anywhere online. As far as I'm aware, I'm the first person acknowledging this. This level tilts your camera very, very slightly, but you can tell. As soon as you go down the elevator into the infinite spawning enemy death funnel, your camera is slightly tilted. And no, this is not the level geometry. The entire level itself is not at a weird little incline. It's your player camera being tilted. The PC version is like this, so is the Xbox 360 version. Yeah, it's a glitch. I'm wondering if maybe the developers were experimenting with making D6 feel like it was falling apart, and having the lower level lean at a slight incline was one of their ideas. But they tested this with the camera, forgot to take it out, or more likely, this is a glitch caused by entering the elevator, because you can sort of see an immediate shift in perspective as soon as you load into this part of the level. This is something I've noticed for years, and for some reason, I can't find anyone else mentioning this online. I feel like I'm going crazy, because it's like an Emperor has no clothes situation. Since no one has mentioned this, new players maybe assume it's just a glitch exclusive to them. But no, this is a hard-coded bug in every original version of Metro 2033. It doesn't matter what type of PC you have, or if you're playing it on Xbox. Hell, look up any gameplay walkthrough for the original release of Metro, and you will see everyone experiencing this bug. I have no idea what's causing it. Just makes the entire level feel trippy. Anyway, D6 is a rough section with an annoying crane gimmick at the very end. I feel the use of the biomass was somewhat wasted. I wish the level would have instead focused on being more of a horror stealth sequence, instead of a stressful, annoying shooting gallery. But with D6 powered up, the Rangers are able to remote launch the missile strike against the Dark One Hive. There's only one hiccup. We have to get a laser guidance system set up so that the missiles strike their target. So we have to get to the tallest vantage spot within view of the Hive. And wouldn't you know it, it's the TV tower we saw in the prologue. It's finally time to stop the Dark Ones. This is where the game finally flashes back to the prologue, although this time all of our guns and ammo are accounted for. It's more of just a continuation of the prior fight. Artyom and Miller picking themselves back up and pushing into the tower. Lots of watchers, and it feels like an area designed to get you to waste the rest of your ammo. I always felt the journey from D6 all the way to the television tower was a bit rushed. It's basically skipped over thanks to the prologue, and players might be a little confused about where we are geographically, because I think the book does a much better job putting everything in relation to each other. The Dark One's hive is located in the Botanical Gardens, the large forested park inside Moscow. The entrance to Artyom's home station is just 1.5 miles east of here. So this is why it always felt like they glossed over quite a bit in the game, because to get to this tower, we would have gone through Exhibition Station. I've kept comparing the story in the game versus the story in the book, and this will be my last big comparison. In the novel, after D6 was discovered and Artyom goes off to the radio tower, he returns to his home very briefly, and he has one final talk with his dad before he heads out to the surface. It's a meaningful moment, and it gives the reader almost a sense of closure. We see how much Artyom has grown when he returns to Exhibition. The hardened, scarred ranger-to-be that returns home is not the same boy that left. It's also one last reminder of what's at stake. The novel makes it clear Artyom's home station has been all but abandoned. It's in near ruin, with nearly everyone having evacuated down to Riga. The dead are strewn everywhere. And in the middle of all of that, Artyom manages to find his adoptive father. It's a poignant moment in the book. Artyom beginning the story in his reclusive yet comfortable life, only to end up returning tougher and aware that if he doesn't stop the advancing threat, more stations will follow a similar fate. I feel it's a missed opportunity for the campaign. A touching moment between Artyom and Alex. Another opportunity to show the player how dangerous the Dark Ones are. In fact, you could have squeezed plenty of levels between D6 and the tower. You could have even had a whole section with Artyom, Miller, and the rest of the Rangers crossing through to the exhibition. Keep in mind, it's called Exhibition Station because it exists just outside of a massive exhibition center. As far as I'm concerned, there should have been an entire level set here. In hindsight, I'm starting to think that maybe this is the reason why they had a prologue. Just to make you not question Artyom and Miller traveling this distance in such a short span of time. But once inside the tower, it's a straight shot to the top. A fairly calmer sequence of awkward platforming and hiding from demons that circle outside. All the while, you get constant visions the closer to the top you get. Massive icicles hang down the ledges, besieged by wind and ice. The tower exterior is crumbling, exemplified by beautiful beams of sunlight creeping through. When 4A visited the tower to grab some reference photography, the tower was currently under repairs due to a fire, and so it's likely that these photos of the viewing platforms inspired the near-destroyed, half-built skeletal look of the whole tower. The view is incredible, one of the few times in this game where you don't feel cramped inside a tight corridor or a narrow street. You can finally see all the way to the horizon. The ruins of Moscow stretch as far as the eye can see. The sun has barely risen, so the sky is full of these deep, dark blues and toxic greens, just barely giving way to the morning sun. Pretty much the only true glimpse of sunlight we've had the entire game. And of course, we can't ignore that giant, odd-looking hive directly ahead. Almost like a termite colony. We can see light scattered across it. It's the only source of light anywhere down below. If we're looking north, then this is where the Botanical Garden sits in real life. And the scale here is pretty spot on. Also, remember how I said that in real life, Artyom's home station is incredibly close to the tower? Well, fun fact, if you do some sleuthing from the top of the tower in real life, you can clearly make out the entrance to the real life equivalent of Exhibition Station. It's very blurry, but easily identifiable when you consider that Conquerors of Space Memorial sitting right next to the entrance. Another fun fact, this monument can be seen at the start of Metro Last Light when you cross through the ruins of the gardens. But it's this final moment in the game where we really need to confront the threat driving Artyom through the entire campaign.
He cannot be allowed.
After the bombs fell, the surface became uninhabitable to humans, so they had to flee underground. The animals that remain up above became overly mutated, evolving very fast over what should just be a single generation. Rats, dogs, bats, all growing into hideous ravenous mutants. So we get to the obvious question. If all of these creatures were able to mutate and survive, what about any humans left behind? A lot of people were left behind up on the surface. When the entire city tried to flee underground, it was inevitable that only a select few would actually make it inside. Everyone else was either too slow to get to shelter, or they were trapped outside as the pressure seal doors closed. One might assume that these people would have been vaporized from the first blast, or they potentially died from radiation poisoning. But who's to say? With how other species handled the nuclear toxic winter, through some inexplicable process, a new species of man was born. Some have theorized that it might have been a genetic modification, an experiment built pre-war. A good thing the Metro series does is they tend to bypass these sorts of questions. Instead of devolving into discussions on how something might plausibly happen, Metro instead jumps past any explanation, and immediately into this thing existing and being right at your front door. There is a new sentient species on the surface. They can survive in the toxic environment, and they possess unnatural abilities that we are unable to combat. It doesn't matter how these things came into being. All that matters is that they are here. So now what? That's sort of the underlying theme of Metro. Lots of aspects to it that don't quite make sense in a logical, physics-adhering world. But that isn't the world of Metro. Like I said, it's a world where reality has broken. We don't have time to analyze if it's possible for a new breed of humanity to be born out of radioactive fallout. Metro instead skips to the conclusion. Who cares how it happened? It happened. What are you going to do now? If there was another breed of human and they possessed these abilities, as well as the ability to thrive out in the wasteland, what does that mean for us as a species? It means that we're losing our claim to the Earth, and there are those in the Metro who would wish to prevent that.
But that's the only exit. What are you going to do next?
Encounters with the Dark Ones are shown to be deadly and dangerous. They are slowly but surely pushing their way into Artyom's home station, silently walking up to guard posts and making soldiers go mad with hallucinations and visions. This is why the Dark Ones are so dangerous. And I do think Last Light actually does a much better job explaining just what a Dark One can do to a person, and why they were so feared. They can break your mind, and they'll wipe out entire squads like they're nothing. It's this threat that's putting the entire Metro on alert, as when Exhibition Station falls, there's nothing stopping the Dark Ones from progressing further into the Metro. They're the entire reason Artyom even goes on his journey in the first place.
Destroy him. Stop him.
But throughout the game, we're given brief hints at how the Dark Ones aren't necessarily the monsters we thought they were. We see visions of Dark Ones not attacking in hostility, but simply trying to engage with us calmly and quietly. The handful of Dark Ones we do see don't attack Artyom. Rather, they watch from a distance, preferring to hide and retreat rather than confront us head on. At the end of Black Station, we also get a pretty explicit message here.
Even children hated by their parents try to love and understand them. We wish to understand you and help you.
It's in this final moment, as Artyom is setting up the laser guidance system, does he learn that the Dark Ones want peace. The very enemy that we've been terrified by is not an enemy at all.
We want peace.
One unique thing about the Dark Ones that really stands out on a revisit has to be how they're designed. The Dark Ones are different from other mutants. Things like overly pronounced teeth, twisted bizarre amalgamations of flesh and bone, predatory beady eyes. These can be found in all the other mutants that roam the ruins of Moscow. They immediately read as hostile and dangerous. But the Dark Ones? Not so much. Their appearance is humanoid, and as such there's a strangeness to their long, gangly limbs. But they lack any visible sharp teeth or mandibles, or even claws. They appear physically quite harmless. Their face, as weird as it is, invokes a fairly unaggressive response. Many people have pointed out how their face kind of resembles a gas mask. The new breed of humanity must be born with a mask already welded to their face just to survive. I like their design. I like how big and prominent their eyes are, and how the lack of any mouth or teeth keep them from entering any kind of uncanny valley. They look a bit alien, but they don't look particularly scary, at least compared to the rest of the mutants. A good comparison is to look at some of the earlier concept art made for the Dark Ones. If we look at the original concept art for 2033 the game, you can see that they had slightly beadier predator eyes. Their limbs were also weird and rotting, with sinuous tendrils of muscle and bone sticking out. Even their face initially looked like a protruding skull, which was eventually smoothed out and made less scary in the final model. When we take a look at other pieces of art for the Dark Ones, we find designs that resemble more deformed humans, to the point of stretching into body horror. In a lot of art, they're depicted as monstrous and unnerving. Designs that look outwardly hostile. Why do these designs elicit such a reaction from us? Well, it's our human brains, seeing something that is vaguely human, but not quite. So we react in the same way as if we're seeing a deformed, rotting corpse. I do respect the desire to make the Dark Ones truly appear as mutated human descendants, but the truth is, these designs would have made the message of the game a lot harder to convey. People would just see them as scary undead monsters. Oddly enough, I think 4A's approach in making them look less human, and going so far as to make them look smoothed out and streamlined, removing those rotting limbs and bone fragments, and especially giving them those big, inquisitive puppy dog eyes. It's this design that makes a player a little less afraid of them. There is still a sense of unease around Dark Ones, this humanoid intelligent being that has a vague resemblance to us. But that uncanniness is no longer there. Nor do they look like an unnatural amalgamation of flesh and teeth like the rest of the mutants in this game. When the idea of making peace with these creatures is hinted at, it makes you stop and think, which I know wouldn't be the case for these guys. Seriously, imagine trying to convey the ending of this game, but all the Dark Ones look like Dead Space necromorphs. No, I think the design is great for what it's trying to convey, and it also carries a sense of mysteriousness without making them too outwardly scary. I think it's a severely underrated piece of art design. Even the way they move and behave. The rest of the mutants are animated quite well, in the sense that they act uncaringly. When you see them interact with the environment, such as running, crawling, or biting, they appear to do so on basic animal instinct. Not the Dark Ones. They act inquisitively. They move gracefully. They also behave mostly defensively when they can, acting more as neutral observers, preferring to watch from a safe distance. So if these guys are as peaceful as they claim to be, why are they attacking us in the first place? Well, here's the big spoiler. They aren't. It's been established that the Dark Ones communicate telepathically. How they can do this, it's unknown, either through a lab experiment, an act of mysticism, or just a natural mutation. Whatever the case is, they speak to each other telepathically, and in the process have lost the ability to speak vocally altogether. Amongst the Dark Ones themselves, this doesn't seem to be an issue. They're all able to project their thoughts and feelings to one another, which helps them understand and peacefully coexist. Plus, if you can imagine how hostile the surface is, with all manner of predators no doubt constantly prowling for food, the ability to stay silent while also communicating with your buddies sounds like an evolutionary jackpot. Issues only start cropping up when they try to communicate with someone that isn't telepathic. Us. When the Dark Ones come into contact with humanity, all of a sudden that telepathic communication becomes useless. So instead of getting a peaceful, normal SMS text message to your brain, normal people go utterly insane and their brains become completely scrambled. You see visions, hallucinate things that aren't there, all because a Dark One is trying to convey a message or an idea. Yeah, they're wiping away our defenses by complete accident. If they wanted to, the Dark Ones could quite easily dispatch the survivors of humanity with aggressive hallucinations and dream states. They could conquer the Metro if they wanted to, but they aren't. The Dark Ones keep approaching humanity, mainly through the exposed exhibition station, right at the edge of the Metro line. These seemingly peaceful approaches towards the station are taken as an act of hostility, which isn't helped by the Dark One's unintentional ability to Michael Ironside people they come into contact with. Additionally, Dark Ones are not completely resistant to physical threats, bullets included. So it's a constant tug of war between Dark Ones struggling to contact humanity, and humanity constantly pushing them away, resulting in deaths on either side. Yeah, it's not lost on me that we are at the top of a tower, reaching into the heavens, about to destroy a fellow species of man because neither of us can communicate with each other. I wasn't joking when I called this the Tower of Babel. This is why Artyom is important. He's one of the few people to come into contact with a Dark One and survive their psychic communications. Where most people go mad, Artyom finds himself able to quite easily parse these messages, at first appearing ambiguous, but by the end of the game, they become more clear and understandable. It's through him that the Dark Ones are trying to negotiate peace. There's something special about Artyom. There has been quite a bit of retconning by Glukhovsky. In the original book and in the game, none of it's really touched upon. Artyom simply has a connection with these Dark Ones. However, after the release of the game, Dmytro Glukhovsky would eventually write The Gospel According to Artyom, a series of short stories further explaining the universe and the lore. In it, Artyom explains how he has this ability in the first place, which is then showcased in Last Light. To sum it up, Glukhovsky retconned it so that Artyom had an encounter with the Dark One as a young child, which was then kind of wiped from his memory, but not really. I don't know. When I first played this game, I always thought that the reason he was able to communicate with Dark Ones was because of this event right here, when his brain collided with a Dark One's ghost. It's a little silly, but that's how I always interpreted this whole moment. By the time you climb to the top of the tower, the diverging endings will become evident. Throughout the game, you would have been presented with opportunities to accumulate moral points. There's nearly 100 of these scattered throughout the campaign. They can be obtained through performing very minor actions. You can also lose them as well. By the end of the game, if you have at least of these 50 moral points, it'll provide you with the opportunity to choose between letting the Dark Ones die or saving them. I respect the developers for taking this ending from the book and expanding on it, making it actually a bit of a choice for the player. In the book, there's obviously only one ending, and it's the bad one. Instead of leaving the ending as a static plot point, the devs built upon it, made it into something that the players can actually affect. Although saying that players can change the ending is very loose. The moral point system remains a point of contention amongst fans. On paper, it sounds like a good idea. Moral decision making throughout the game leading to a good ending. But it's clear that the game throughout its campaign was not designed with that in mind. Or at the very least, the developers ran out of ideas quickly on how to provide the player with moral choices. There are some decisions that work really well. The choice for accepting or refusing the bullets that Sasha's mom gives you when you rescue him, that's a good little moral choice. I like that. Extra bullets make the game easier, but choosing to let her keep those bullets is a choice that says, no, Artyom did not save the child for materialistic gain. He only did so because it was right. You can also lose those points if you become too murderous or greedy, stealing bullets from unsuspecting civilians, or gunning down prisoners in a combat section. They'll lower your moral rating and they'll prevent you from getting the good ending. But these are just some moral points that you can get. Most of the game has weird, questionable bullshit decisions, like strumming a guitar, or making sure you talk to every side character, not killing certain enemies in some areas, but not caring about what you do for the rest of the level. Letting a vision play out in its entirety without moving. That'll make you lose points. Same if you walk away from a character as they're talking to you. That'll lose points as well. It's kind of weird how the game won't care if you let a poor prisoner get executed, but if you act somewhat rude to some random guy you've just met, now all of a sudden you're a bad person. There's 100 of these points, and it's clear that the devs were running out of ideas. I think simplifying the system and cutting it down to a handful of moral decisions in the game, like maybe a dozen at most, is all you really need. Give us a handful of these moral decisions. Let us choose how to interact with Dark Ones that we encounter, either in the world or in our visions, and build the morality system just off of that. The problem with the system as it is now is that there are so many moral points, you can lose focus of the game, and instead of paying attention to a set piece, you're crouched staring at the ground looking for a guitar or a book or a toy to interact with. Even today, people will play through 2033 completely unaware that they are making any sort of moral decisions whatsoever. And by the time they get to the end, they've completely fucked themselves out of getting the good ending. If the intention was to make the good ending super inaccessible, then yeah, I can see why 4A would go this route. But even still, it all just feels questionable. For the record, I find no interest in a remake for any Metro game. However, if Metro 2033 could be redone as a game, I feel the morality system needs to be expanded upon. In addition, I feel some more mechanics could be added to it. One mechanic that I wish wasn't absent was the idea of Artyom slowly understanding what the Dark Ones are telling him. Picture this, a campaign where Artyom encounters Dark Ones just like normal. Their visions are weird and mysterious. However, As Artyom starts making good moral decisions, as he starts acting charitable, or even if he starts to spare these dark ones that he encounters, not shooting at them, and instead letting them try to communicate with him. Imagine if doing this would slowly turn their messages to be a little bit more comprehensible. If the player keeps taking the moral choice, maybe they'll start spotting more dark ones who aren't openly afraid of you anymore. These visions and dreams that used to be cryptic and bizarre are now very understandable. And by the end of the game, you can openly understand exactly what the dark ones are saying. Alternatively, if you don't spare the dark ones in your dreams, if you act hostile, if you take the selfish route, if you don't care about morality, then maybe the dark ones will avoid you. Maybe the visions you get from them become a little scarier, a little more hostile, more aggressive. Dark ones make you hallucinate scary things just to keep you away. And if players keep going down this route, maybe they never learn of the dark one's intention, that they wanted peace. It's an idea that I've always thought about with Metro, and it's an ending that I know would have been way too much work on a dev team that was already struggling as is. Ultimately, I'm fine with Metro 2033 and its ending choices. Both endings make you doubt if you did the right thing at all. They make you think that maybe you've just doomed mankind, but in a different way for each.
20 seconds to homing procedure completion.
Prevent, save.
10 seconds to homing procedure completion.
We want peace.
If Artyom shoots the missile guidance system, then the Dark Ones are spared. Artyom looks out into the quiet, cold ruins of Moscow. A lone Dark One on the ground looks back up at him. Artyom just basking in what's presumably a million questions racing through his mind as the sun slowly starts to rise on a new world. What does this mean for the future of humanity? What does this mean for the Dark Ones? Remember, only Artyom truly knows that the Dark Ones want to work alongside mankind. As beautiful as it is, the idea of two species becoming allies and returning to reclaim the surface, it is a bit of a pipe dream. Artyom is just one guy who knows the truth. As far as the Rangers know, Artyom just failed to set up the guidance system. To everyone else in the Metro, the Dark Ones are still a threat, and it wouldn't take a single failed missile launch to stop anyone else from trying to destroy them too. The conflict between humanity and the Dark Ones does not end here. There is far more to the story once Artyom climbs down the tower. Who would even believe him? The other Rangers? Miller? The people from Exhibition Station? Would any of the other factions believe him? It's my belief that it's really a lost cause at this point. The game doesn't elaborate on any of that. It quietly fades to credits, and that's it. There's a reason why this is not the canonical ending, and it remains as a little unlockable path for players seeking it, which is why most players miss this ending. The good ending is one that remains just as bleak as the bad ending, just a little hopeful. Any first-time player is going to get the canonical bad ending. This is the ending from the book, and it's the ending that all future Metro games are canonical to.
He does not understand. He can stop.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Homing procedure complete.
Artyom, the missiles are in flight!
Artyom doesn't stop the launch. The missiles continue their path, and you're forced to silently watch the missiles pierce the dark early morning sky before raining down in a torrent of fire. The Dark One's home is destroyed, and them along with it. Artyom is left alone to stew in his thoughts about what could have been. This is the ending Glukhovsky wrote, and as such, it's definitely the more thematically appropriate ending. Artyom either being too late or too afraid to stop the missile launch, resulting in mankind's chance at redemption being completely obliterated. All thanks to a misguided attempt for Artyom to save his home. This ending definitely hits harder. It's why Glukhovsky wrote it. It's a depressing punch to the gut, showing how mankind, even when given the chance to rebuild, rejects it for destruction. A cynical derision of human nature. It also creates a dilemma of belief for the player and the reader. The book does a bit of a better job depicting Artyom as more of an agnostic. He's not opposed to the spiritual lecturings of characters like Khan or other religious individuals down in the metro. He just has his doubts. Why would a god let the remainder of mankind suffer like this? Why would a god abandon them? Only for that question to potentially be answered by these beings sent from above, who have a desire to help humanity. Artyom is the one person who's able to understand these beings. Even Khan, who has his doubts about their hostility, doesn't explicitly know what they want. Artyom's the first and only person who does. Am I saying that Artyom is literally Jesus? Yes. Okay, no. He's more like Moses, a child of an old tribe of men, but who was only an infant and doesn't remember any of it. He's grown up in the shadow of the underground as the only home he's ever known. Despite this, he's singled out by the Dark Ones, by chance or by deliberation, to help usher his people out into the world again. I mean, come on, one of the sequels is literally called Exodus. It's right there. I think the religious framing is a valid way to interpret this story, especially as the books and games continue the world building for what the ending alludes to, that being mankind trying to redeem itself. Neither ending feels particularly grandiose, more just a moment to reflect on your journey, wondering if things are better or worse off. In 2010, after an admittedly short and rushed marketing campaign, the game was finally released for Xbox 360 and PC. Critics at the time were fairly positive, if a little bit lukewarm. Some praised its deep world building and amazing sense of immersion. The storytelling was top-notch with a captivating single player full of action, horror, and weighty themes. However, the game wasn't without its detractors. Many reviewers were quite harsh towards its clunkiness. Some even criticized its hard-as-nails difficulty, exacerbated even further with the Ranger Mode DLC. But Metro was a unique experience, and while some critics weren't fully on board for it, there was still a sizable audience that quickly acclimated to it. I think what might have helped was the lucky timing of 2033's release. It came out in March of 2010. For context, this was a pretty big year for action games for both PC and Xbox. Plenty of FPS series had big releases this and the prior year, so the action shooter genre was bringing in plenty of people who were interested in new big budget FPS games. Additionally, horror games were few and far between at this time. As far as I remember, the largest horror games of the year would have been Amnesia, a PC exclusive, and then for the Xbox, Alan Wake. The prior year wasn't much better either. Survival horror fans were still reeling over the much maligned titles that had come out a year prior. Games that had abandoned their darker horror storylines in favor of mindless action. It basically seemed like the entire horror game genre was going through one massive identity crisis. And aside from indie games, there weren't a lot of dedicated horror titles. Metro kind of found itself with very little competition in regards to pure, thrilling survival horror. The last bit of interesting timing came with the North American release of Stalker Call of Pripyat. This would end up being the last Stalker entry by GSC Game World before their inevitable shutdown a few years later. Its release was met with generally positive reviews. People liked its free roam, its approach to quests and missions, but like every other Stalker game, it had its share of jank. And as Stalker fans were wrestling with GSC's latest Eurojank on the PC, Metro sneakily launched with a far more polished campaign, a deep horror-focused story, elements of survival horror and action, as well as very nice presentation at the time. It sort of found itself attracting gamers from all these different camps. People who liked action FPS games, people who like survival horror, and the handful of Stalker fanatics who had been disappointed by GSC's offerings. Metro immediately found itself with a large and dedicated fan base who loved the game for its world, its characters, as well as its difficult survival horror action gameplay. Despite the bit of Eurojank, players found themselves falling in love with 4A's flagship title, and what was a nail-biting Hail Mary by 4A had managed to pay off, at least enough for 4A to gain steady ground and immediately begin working on a sequel. I remember that launch trailer, which was a really good trailer too. It used the theme from 28 Days Later. I remember watching this on some Xbox newsfeed as a young bunker dweller, and I was instantly hooked by it. I remember how there wasn't much of a marketing campaign for it, and it really only spread through good word of mouth. I used to follow a Halo YouTuber who doesn't make content anymore, and he uploaded a very brief gameplay video of him exploring the library. This section looked so scary and unique. I finally caved in, and I had to buy it. Young Bunker Dweller loved the game. He loved the novel. Such a simple concept that had so much going for it. It was a post-apocalyptic world that I fell in love with, thinking how cool the Rangers were and how awesome their armor looked. For that matter, just how awesome the entire aesthetic of the game was, with its love of gas masks, AKs, and pipe guns, the terrifying mutants, the incorporation of the supernatural too. That added so much more to the game for me. For as action-packed as it was also an intimate story between characters trying to save their home. A flawed, horrifying world to call home, but home nonetheless. The success of Metro 2033 was the boon 4A Games needed to turn their passion into a business. Their first game was not only a success, but a worldwide success. Metro 2033 was no longer a name relegated to niche internet circles in Eastern Europe. Thanks to them, it was fairly well known even in the West. The book had finally been translated to English. The sequel, Metro 2034, was already released in Russia and was picking up steam. Metro was slowly growing into a franchise. Both 4A and Glukovsky could feel it. THQ also desperately needed a franchise to call their own. The early 2010s would prove not to be kind to THQ, thanks to some questionable business decisions. 4A had been negotiating back and forth with their publisher, trying to get the ball rolling and making a sequel. It was a constant struggle with 4A fighting to receive more support from THQ, with THQ constantly letting the studio fend for themselves in increasingly rougher working conditions. Keep in mind the geopolitical and economic landscape Ukraine was in at the time. 4A staff were in an all-out fucking war. They were fighting against power outages. They were dealing with corrupt customs officials who kept threatening to steal their hardware. And as if that wasn't hard enough, they were now also dealing with THQ's constant derision and just continuous bullshit. With one instance of the THQ CEO visiting the cramped offices and telling them to their face that consumers do not care about their working conditions. THQ went bankrupt. In December of 2010, they would declare Chapter 11. All their properties and studios would be taken to auction. It was a few shaky weeks, with Metro being up in the air, 4A completely not knowing whether or not they would ever be able to make a sequel. Luckily for 4A, they wouldn't have to worry for too long. Koch Media, an Austrian media company, would eventually buy the rights. The game would now be published by Koch Media's own game publishing division. This is what became Deep Silver. From there, 4A has continued to pump out titles under the Deep Silver umbrella, and 2033 would get its sequels. In 2013, after a bit of a hiccup during development, they would release Last Light. It would be a proper follow-up to 2033, unlike the novel 2034, and it would directly follow Artyom's path after the canonical bad ending. I have thoughts about Last Light, which I'm going to save for its own video. The big thing Last Light did was they helped 4A improve their own in-house engine, which was a huge step up compared to 2033. Gameplay felt a lot more smooth, stealth was heavily modified to not be as janky. It was a nice looking game. Even now, there's parts of it that still hold up. So with a better engine under their belt, 4A went back and did a full remaster of the original, Metro 2033 Redux. If you didn't own a copy of the original game, this is probably the version that you're going to be stuck playing. The graphics were completely changed. Gameplay was taken directly from Last Light. Stealth was improved to match Last Light's mechanics. Dialogue was replaced. Character models were updated to more match their design in Last Light. Also, the original was delisted on Steam, and it kind of bugged me. I like playing old versions of games, so I get I'm the weird one. With Metro, I've always tried to play the original version. It's what I grew up with. I've looked around and I was never able to find any reason given for why they delisted it. The most commonly accepted theory is that THQ was the publisher of that version of the game, which you would think Deep Silver should have now that they bought the rights to the entire franchise. Who knows, maybe it's just some weird legal web, and now maybe they're not allowed to republish that exact game anymore. What's weird is 2033 has been made available. The store page was actually reopened on its 10-year anniversary, where people could pick up the game for free, only for it to then be reclosed right after. My own personal theory for why the original version was removed was also because of how buggy it was. Even now, the game feels like it's held together by duct tape, and I think 4A just didn't want people accidentally buying the old version of the game when they were also offering a much more polished newer version. I at least better understand this reasoning, even if I don't condone it. I think that's what had me frustrated with Redux when I first played it. I was having a hard time disassociating it from the fact that the original game was no longer purchasable. But now that I've had time to let things simmer, it's not a bad remaster. Graphics are nice. Gameplay is straight from Last Light, so it's pretty good. This isn't quite a Halo Anniversary situation, where an old game has all of its assets replaced with a completely different art direction under the supervision of two studios who had no hand in even making the original. Instead, Metro Redux was a remaster made by the exact same developer, who were probably borrowing assets from Last Light, but this was a game that was a direct follow-up. It fits because the art direction in Last Light was a direct evolution of 2033, so it never felt too jarring. Plus, I like the better stealth mechanics in 2033's more open stealth sequences. That's good stuff. My complaints are minor. I had some texture bugs when I played this game a while back, and like any Metro game, there is still a little bit of jank left when it comes to certain levels and sections. I also miss some of the artistic decisions made in 2033, mainly being the cloudy gray outdoor environments of the original, which have since been replaced by more screenshot-friendly lighting. For example, the Dead City levels aren't fully overcast anymore, and they now have a bright sun shining down on you, while the Outpost level is set in the dead of night. It's a stylistic change, and while it may look prettier, I do personally prefer the gloomy bleakness of the original graphics. Either way, Redux is a very competent remaster. It's not a bad way to play the original game. I always champion for playing the original versions of titles, but if you don't want the hassle of grabbing yourself a copy, then Redux is not a bad place to start. After that, there was a bit of a break, where, silly me, I had assumed that the brand had gone on ice. Then we got Metro Exodus, once again being a direct follow-up, taking the book Metro 2035 and essentially using that novel as the opening prologue levels in the game. The few opening levels are set in Moscow, only to have Artyom and friends thrown all the way out into the Russian wilderness, traveling across the Eurasian continent. It had massive open levels with non-linear progression, mixed in with sections of linear corridors, more reminiscent of what Metro was originally known for. It expanded the series, and it showed that there was an entire world beyond the tunnels under Moscow. I have a lot of things to say about Exodus, but just like Last Light, I think they're deserving of their own video. Either way, Exodus did a lot to revive interest in the series, and it brought in a ton of new fans into Metro. Fans who are now embracing the older games as well as the novels. In 2024, publisher Deep Silver, working with another studio, Vertigo Games, released Metro Awakening VR, a VR spin-off set in the Metro universe, being a prequel to 2033. There's not much to say about it. 4A had no involvement, so it's not a real Metro game. Glukowski allegedly did help with the story. He seems to be quite proud of the franchise. It seems like he's happy to help write stories for all of the games too. He's had a direct hand in every game after 2033. Awakening is just an experiment, just a way for Deep Silver to play around with one of their IPs, and reviews seem to suggest as such. Just a by-the-numbers VR shooter, which makes sense. Vertigo, the developer, are known for that. It's ironic that Deep Silver reached out to them, because 4A have also experimented with VR. Arctica 1. This was a VR shooter made exclusively for the Oculus Rift back in 2017, a couple years before Exodus. It was another post-apocalyptic setting, with human survivors living in underground shelters beneath a snow-swept world. Many people noted its immediate similarities to it and Metro, although this game went for a much more prominent sci-fi aesthetic. Perhaps 4A has plans of starting their own franchise, beyond the scope of Metro. But with how good Metro has been to them, and with how dedicated they've been to the series, a part of me thinks that they have no desire to leave Glukowski behind. This leads us back to the present. And, wouldn't you know it, that very Metro sequel has been announced, just a day before I was set to release this video. It made editing this a lot more annoying. It looks like it's continuing 4A's trend of opening the Metro world up. But of course, if we're talking about current events, a week prior to this trailer, a scrapped build for 4A's fourth Metro game leaked online. This was a canceled prototype, dating all the way back to 2022. Given that it was ultimately scrapped, there isn't too much we can glean from it to learn about the official sequel. I'm hesitant to even show any of the images from it, because Deep Silver has been going after people sharing any video or screenshots. Which makes sense. This is clearly a stolen build. I will acknowledge that the people who did analyze these leaks, some of them have claimed that it is a loose adaptation of the book 2034, likely through premise alone. I haven't confirmed this info myself, but it's an interesting idea for a Metro game, though that's a game we're probably never going to see. Given how it was canceled, I'd guess that this was just a prototype that 4A ultimately decided was a dead end. This happens to a lot of game studios. Games go through tons of iterations. Metro 2033 sure did. What I do believe is that the game will expand upon Exodus. I think we can safely assume we're going to see more larger environments, more open world set pieces. There's an open ending to Exodus that can be expanded upon in an untold number of directions. In addition, I'd like to make a future prediction. We're exactly 7 years from Metro Exodus, but we are also 7 years away from the fabled future year 2033. We're at the exact halfway point, with a Metro game likely to come out in the next year or two. So this leads to some very interesting and convenient timing, in my opinion. I think so long as current trends persist, that being the commercial success of high-budget remakes, and if 4A lasts long enough as a company until then, I think it's assured we will be getting a Metro 4 in the next couple years. After that, in lieu of a Metro 5, we will instead be getting a Metro 2033 remake, probably set to release in 2033. Probably akin to something like the Dead Space remake, a much more open-ended, higher-budget approach to the campaign in 2033, but redone. Not just a remaster, but a full remake, a redo of the game's core pitch, making the levels a lot more open, expanding upon moments from the novel that were absent from the game, changing up the plot to further match the book and the subsequent sequels, as well as fixing some levels, enhancing others, and just overall completely redoing the campaign. That's my prediction. I think the timing is way too good for 4A to pass up on. They've shown that they love working with Metro, and with Glukhovsky. So as long as the general public isn't completely sick of remakes by then, which currently they aren't, then I feel this is a safe assumption. Like, come on, Metro 2033 in the year 2033, they could even just call it Metro TM, so people would naturally call it Metro parentheses 2033. The marketing writes itself, people, come on. And for the record, I'm not asking for a remake. Despite that, I can very clearly see what 4A is setting up for. I'm just throwing this out there. I think this is very likely to happen. Though I could easily be proven wrong, who knows? It's happened before. A lot has happened since the release of Exodus. Events that have affected 4A and Glukhovsky. Invasion, political exile. I guess we shouldn't have been so naive to assume that a region of the world that has historically always been politically volatile wouldn't continue being volatile within our lifetimes. We do know, thanks to these recent events, the tone and writing of the upcoming Metro 4 has taken a different turn, likely leading to a more cynical, if perhaps darker portrayal of the world. What is certain is that a prolific, beloved Russian author might never be able to return to his birthplace, in fear of becoming a political prisoner. And 4A, well, they were lucky to have moved their studio years prior. Their old friends weren't as lucky. It's hard to say what will happen. Art isn't made in a vacuum. We've already seen reverberations throughout the industry as global geopolitical events affect artists and their art. But it does put a shadow over everything. And now when you discuss these franchises and these games, there's a little bit of context that makes it a little more difficult to discuss. 2033 was a title that I spent too long away from. Having years of hindsight under my belt, and having played its sequels, as well as sequels to games that had been left in the GSC 4A divorce, I definitely have a different perspective of Metro now than I did as a teen. Metro 2033 is an action horror stealth masterpiece, from a developer who went through so much turmoil. For a project that seemed doomed from the start, came a little title whose world was so intriguing and fleshed out that a ton of new players were instantly hooked on it. A game that had a compelling atmosphere and tone, not to mention a campaign full of nail-biting tension mixed with adrenaline-pumping action. 2033 was a risk, and it seemed to hit with the right audience. It was easy to pick up and get immersed in, while also providing a good amount of difficulty for those who were seeking it. The story was captivating, and the pace kept players hooked from start to finish, be it ambushing patrols of soldiers out on the surface, sneaking up on clueless bandits sitting around their campfire, or running like hell from a swarm of mutants. It's a campaign that was both parts exciting and terrifying. The tone of the book definitely leaned more on the creepy side. It had bits of action here and there, but overall, it just had a constant feeling of helplessness. Artyom was always out of his element. He was constantly in way over his head, getting sidetracked by mutants stalking him, getting captured and enslaved, or being kidnapped by a cult. And those were just with other denizens of the Metro. There are more worrying, inexplicable supernatural forces beyond our mortal plane, driving people to the edge of madness. Artyom witnesses horrors beyond his comprehension, and he somehow manages to make it to the other side. If you had read the book before you'd played the game, You may expect the game to be more explicitly horror-focused, with very little combat or action, something more akin to like Amnesia. In this regard, I think 4A's history at GSC might have influenced them in making their game far more action-focused. They had spent years working in development hell on what would become Stalker 1, and before then, GSC mostly had history with action games, especially action FPS games, not horror. Combine that with action horror being a proven successful genre in the mid to late 2000s, and the prospect of following suit with Metro was probably a no-brainer. A part of me would be curious to see the alternate timeline of Metro 2033, to see a game that was entirely stealth horror focused, a game that was a lot closer to the tone of the novel, where your only objective was really to sneak around enemy patrols and not fight them head on, a game that had enemies hunting for the player and not the other way around, a game that was about running and hiding, not at all shooting. On the flip side, as interesting as that sounds, I also don't know if that would have been the game to put Metro on the map for so many people. 2033 was a blend of multiple game elements, and it's this specific concoction that probably helped it gain such a strong audience in the first place. People who might have been adverse to horror games, but who might have seen its action, or its stealth, or even just its story and world, and were so intrigued by it that they had to check it out. Maybe that's why I give Metro a ton of slack, because it was a gateway horror game to a lot of people, myself included. That action for a lot of us was a big draw to the series. I adored the novel in its unique tone, but I also respect the game for essentially giving itself a streamlined, focused pace. Metro is a beloved little title, warts and all, and it has incredibly rough edges. It's the definition of clunky. It has awkwardness across every aspect of its design, yet it's still championed as a classic. Some people on the outside looking in might see Metro and wonder why. Why of all games, of all series, is Metro even so beloved? Especially when there are far more games that people could turn to, games that are more polished or have a bigger budget. To them, I'd say the jank is why people like it. Okay, no, not explicitly. The jank can get annoying. But it being there is a reminder that this is a game made by people who are flawed and human. We're seeing the brushstrokes, a reminder of what we're playing wasn't made by committee. It wasn't focus tested to appeal to the lowest common denominator. It's soul. Metro is overflowing with it. Those flaws, those little quirks, are just remnants of that. Ways we recognize that this is a piece of art and not a lifeless product. This is a world built by one guy, all because he had a fascination with the city he grew up in. It's a game whose style was shaped by a team of heavily inspired nerds with their love of the medium. In a way, it reminds me of those old Soviet-era films and novels that Glukhovsky was himself inspired by. They're good examples of amazing artists whose work came from struggled developments, troubled productions, creators constantly fighting with their editors and their producers, directly at odds with Soviet film boards or Soviet literary censors. Stalker is infamous for having its quite stunning color grading be a direct result of Tarkovsky's cinematographer having trouble with the film stock. The Doom City was stuck in limbo for 17 years because no Soviet publisher wanted it. These works of art are beautiful thanks to their struggles and their imperfections, not in spite of them. Maybe I'm being too artsy-fartsy and flowery over a PC game. You could argue that this isn't Tarkovsky, and I probably won't argue against that. But Metro truly is a flawed gem made by people who put their entire blood, sweat, and tears into it. This is a game that propelled the studio into success, and after setback after setback, they still persevered. It's the game that made me a lifelong fan, and the game that will always keep me hungry for more, for 4A's next project, for Glukhovsky's next book. I'm excited to see where the series goes, to see where 4A goes, to see where Glukhovsky goes. No matter where they are, what they do, what stories they want to explore, what new games they make, what new worlds they create, it's because of 2033 that I will be following them every step of the way.